Nathan Cooper's green bicycle was still leaning slightly on the lawn when the 8-year-old boy vanished in the Old Orchard neighborhood of Toledo. Population 8,112. The September afternoon of 1988 drew to a close with the season's first chilly breeze and thin sunlight spreading over the peaceful streets where children still rode their bikes home alone. At 3:24 p.m., the Coopers' neighbor, Mrs. Marjorie Hale, waved from her kitchen window as Nathan pedaled across the narrow yard separating their two modest, steeply roofed houses, carrying his new sketchbook. The boy was on his way to return the set of colored pencils that Miss Hale had lent him earlier in the week, the wooden pencil box she had carefully kept for more than 2 decades. The elderly woman watched Nathan's figure disappear under the maple trees. His red jacket, the last splash of color before a dark-colored van, quietly turned onto Elderwood Street. What happened in the next 9 minutes would haunt Toledo for more than 3 decades afterward. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. Autumn 1988, in Toledo, Ohio, carried such a serene appearance that it was easy to forget danger sometimes lurked in the most familiar places. The Old Orchard neighborhood at the time was a quintessential Midwestern middle-class community. Houses packed closely together, wide lawns, children playing on sidewalks without much worry. Adults knew each other by sight, and the habit of letting kids walk or bike home alone was considered completely normal. In that context, the Cooper family lived in a 2-story cream-colored house. Daniel Cooper, a mechanic at a local auto repair shop. Marlene Cooper, a kindergarten teacher, and their 2 sons, 8-year-old Nathan and 5-year-old Timothy. Their relationships were close in the classic working-class family way. Daniel was strict but loving, Marlene was sensitive and always overly anxious, and Nathan was an energetic, curious boy who adored his mother and always looked out for his little brother. That day, a completely ordinary day in every sense, Nathan woke up early, ate breakfast, grabbed his old red backpack, and biked to school like every morning. He was excited because he had just finished a colored drawing that his teacher praised, planning to show it to his mom when he got home. The afternoon passed quietly, but a few small things began appearing in the neighborhood that no one paid attention to. A dark green van parked on the curb, a few houses from the Coopers, and a strange man standing near the children's ball field, watching the kids. Some adults caught a glimpse, but only thought he was a repairman or someone's parent. Around 3 p.m., Nathan left school and biked to Frank's Market to buy a can of soda, something he did every Friday. The receipt recorded the time as 3:18 p.m. Afterward, he rode toward home, passing the Saker and Drummond intersection. Timothy, playing in the front yard, saw his brother from a distance and waved. Nathan waved back. Just seconds later, Timothy heard a sound like a car door slamming hard, turned to look, and no longer saw his brother. The bicycle disappeared along with Nathan in less than 10 seconds when no one was directly watching. By 3:40 p.m., Marlene began to notice the unusual delay. At 3:50 p.m., she stepped outside, calling her son's name loudly, and ran to the neighbors to check. Daniel was called home and immediately rushed out to search the neighborhood. Neighbors who heard the news spread out in all directions, checking backyards, sheds, roadsides. No one found any trace beyond Timothy's confusion, as he tried to say he heard something but wasn't sure. A teenager said he thought he saw a green van driving slowly around the area earlier. An old lady said she heard a loud noise but couldn't recall the exact time. Everything they provided was fragmented and uncertain. By 4:27 p.m., when all spontaneous search efforts proved futile and Marlene began to truly panic, Daniel decided to do the only thing left, call 911 to report his son missing. Daniel Cooper's 911 call was transferred to the Toledo Police Department dispatch system at 4:28 p.m., and following 1988 protocol, the dispatcher gathered information with a standard series of questions: victim's name, age, physical description, clothing color, last seen time, recent behavior, and mood. Family relationships, possibility of domestic conflict. Despite Marlene's trembling voice and repeated insistence that Nathan never wanders off on his own, the report was logged with medium priority because there were no signs of violence, no witnesses to coercive behavior, and the time the child had been missing had not yet exceeded the threshold considered high risk at the time. The nearest patrol unit was dispatched to the Cooper home at 4:41 p.m. 2 officers checked the area around the yard, re-interviewed Timothy, examined the items Nathan had with him that day, but found nothing to indicate his direction. When questioning Marlene and Daniel, they noted 2 points. Nathan had never run away from home and had never caused trouble at school. However, the lead officer still suggested that many children in the area had wandered off to play and come back on their own, and that possibility could not yet be ruled out. The case was initially classified as missing juvenile, low risk, meaning Toledo PD did not activate the child abduction protocol, such as expanding the search radius immediately, deploying additional units, blocking potential routes, or issuing alerts to neighboring jurisdictions. This subjective assessment delayed response time, especially in the critical early stage, when every passing minute could lead to long-term consequences. Between 4:45 and 5:10 p.m., police conducted basic investigative steps, confirming Nathan was not at neighbors' homes, not hiding in yards or nearby structures, recording initial witnesses, but only as unverified information, not treating it as evidence of criminal activity. One officer asked Daniel if it was possible Nathan was sulking or had gone to a friend's house. Daniel denied it, but the panic in his voice was interpreted as normal anxiety. Police noted no immediate evidence indicating a crime, and following the model for cases without compelling proof, they prioritized checking the immediate area over activating statewide search mobilization. From 5:10 p.m. onward, Daniel and Marlene continued walking the neighborhood, calling Nathan's name, while officers began checking short street segments. However, this search radius was much smaller than recommended in contemporaneous FBI internal reports, which warned that children disappearing near major roads faced a high risk of being removed from the area within 10-15 minutes. The prevailing mindset of "he wandered off and will come back" inadvertently caused officers to misjudge the most critical fact. Nathan vanished near a busy intersection, and the time no one saw him was long enough for an abduction to occur. When the clock hit 5:30 p.m., patrol unit reports to headquarters still maintained the runaway child classification. So Toledo PD had not activated any expanded search measures beyond the immediate vicinity. This delay in assessment inadvertently created a crucial time gap, the golden early minutes, the only window to determine Nathan's direction of travel or identify a suspicious vehicle leaving the neighborhood, passed without wide containment, major intersection blockades, or quick sweeps of suspect vehicles. While the Cooper family continued going door to door in desperation, hoping Nathan was just lost somewhere, the initial decision to downgrade the risk level made all subsequent rescue efforts exponentially more difficult. Only after Toledo PD completed the initial assessment and determined that Nathan was unlikely to return on his own within a reasonable time frame did they begin deploying a near-range search. A 0.5-mile radius around the Cooper home was established per the standards of the time, forming the first sweep to rule out accident or the victim being trapped in hidden locations. 2 officers were assigned to patrol side streets leading to Secker Road, while another group coordinated with Daniel and neighbors for a wide sweep, front yards, backyards, under decks, sheds, open garages, the end-of-street parking lot, and even narrow strips of land between houses. At each point, they called the boy's name, looked for flattened grass, skid marks, footprints, or any items possibly related to Nathan, but the neighborhood remained as quiet as usual, with nothing indicating an 8-year-old had passed through in panic or injury. Officers expanded the search to natural hazard spots, large bushes near the playground, gaps behind detached garage rows, roadside edges leading to storm drains, and the area around a large drain that had previously caused accidents involving children. They used flashlights to peer into dark corners, repeatedly calling Nathan's name in case he was stuck or had fallen into a hole, but results remained negative. Another group checked narrow alleys connecting blocks, often obscured by fences and shrubbery, to see if Nathan might have biked in and had an accident, but the ground showed only a few old tire tracks of indeterminable age and no signs of a fall or collision. To speed up the sweep, Toledo PD requested K9 support. The tracking dog arrived at 5:32 p.m. and was given Nathan's shirt to scent before following the trail on the ground. Initially, the K9's path matched police assumptions from in front of the Cooper house along the path to Drummond Street, circling the playground and continuing toward the intersection. This was a logical route, matching Timothy's account and Nathan's direction from Frank's Market. However, at the Drummond and Secker intersection, the K9 suddenly lost the scent completely. No indication appeared that Nathan changed direction into side paths, and Secker Road itself was a high-traffic route, making human scent tracking nearly impossible once the victim was placed inside a closed vehicle. Police tried having the K9 check the other two directions at the intersection, but got no positive response, reinforcing the hypothesis that Nathan did not continue moving under his own power after that point. Upon completing the 0.5-mile sweep, the search team recorded 3 key findings: no signs of accident or fall, no items left behind on the route, and the scent trail ended abruptly at the intersection, insufficient to continue beyond the neighborhood. These factors forced Toledo PD to accept an initial conclusion: Nathan was no longer in the immediate vicinity, and he had most likely been, willingly or unwillingly, removed from the neighborhood by motor vehicle in a very short time. This was the first major breakthrough, but because the case was still classified as runaway child, expansion of the search beyond Old Orchard was not immediately implemented, creating a time gap that plunged the Cooper family deeper into despair as the search team returned empty-handed. The unusual silence of the entire neighborhood at that moment only heightened the fear. If Nathan wasn't anywhere within half a mile of home, he could have left the area long before anyone realized. With the assumption that the victim had left the near radius, Toledo PD was forced to move to the next critical step, constructing an accurate timeline to precisely determine the possible abduction window. This became the foundation for all subsequent investigation, and was built by collecting data from 3 sources: the elementary school where Nathan left, Frank's Market where he stopped, and neighborhood witnesses who saw him in the final minutes before disappearance. Records at Old Orchard Elementary confirmed Nathan left the school gate around 3:05 p.m. with a group of friends. The trip from the gate to Frank's Market typically took 7–10 minutes for a child on a bike. Cross-referencing showed the receipt at Frank's Market timed at 3:18 p.m., matching Nathan's normal travel speed and ruling out approach before that time. The store's only surveillance camera in 1988 was not functioning reliably and provided no clear images, but the cashier confirmed Nathan left immediately after paying, around 3:19 p.m. From Frank's Market to the Cooper home, the shortest route was straight along Drummond Road, then turning into the family's block. This segment took about 6–8 minutes for a child on a bike. Timothy's initial interview account aligned with this estimate. Timothy saw Nathan from the yard around 3:25 p.m. the moment the boy waved back before disappearing behind a tree line. Thus, the raw data established 2 key time markers, 3:18 p.m. and 3:25 p.m. However, closer analysis revealed a critical 9-minute gap from Nathan leaving the store until the family realized he was missing, corresponding to the period with no close witness observation. This was regarded as the potential window of abduction, the time frame allowing any external intervention without detection. To pinpoint the interruption, investigators created a detailed breakdown table with 4 segments: time leaving school, time leaving the store, time seen by his brother, and time the family began worrying when Nathan hadn't arrived. In the analysis table, points were marked by 3 factors: level of observation, accessibility, and spatial conditions. The first segment had medium observation due to other students on the route, low accessibility risk. The second segment had lower observation due to quieter terrain and no cameras. This was where the perpetrator could approach unnoticed. The third segment had higher observation because Timothy saw Nathan, but it was precisely here that Nathan vanished in mere seconds, indicating the perpetrator acted extremely quickly and chose the exact moment no adults were nearby. The final part of the gap period was around 3:25, 3:27 p.m., when Nathan disappeared behind the trees and did not reappear at the next spot Timothy expected. Based on geographic distance and child travel speed, investigators determined the perpetrator must have closed in on Nathan after the blind spot, using a motor vehicle to remove him from the scene in under a minute. This aligned with the K9 losing the trail at Secor intersection, a location only a few dozen meters from where Nathan was last seen. At the same time, the timeline also ruled out erroneous possibilities, such as Nathan deliberately turning another way or avoiding home, as there were no signs of redirection and no one saw him beyond the intersection. When all data was compiled onto a map, investigators noted a striking coincidence. The entire window of abduction fell within a low-traffic area in the afternoon, where short road segments had tree lines blocking visibility and no surveillance cameras, an environment ideal for approaching a child without drawing attention. From the collected data, Toledo PD reached a key conclusion for this phase. The abduction most likely occurred between 3:24, 3:27 p.m., right along Drummond Road near the intersection, at the exact moment Nathan had just passed out of his brother's sight, but had not yet entered an area observable by surrounding homes. Those brief 3 minutes became the golden time frame, significantly narrowing the investigative space and reinforcing the determination that Nathan could not have left the area on his own in the usual way after that point. When the standard timeline is completed and established as the guiding foundation for the entire next phase, Toledo PD immediately shifts to the next task, reviewing and compiling all first-round witness statements to check if any information matches the 3:24, 3:27 p.m. time window. The statements fall into three main groups: observations related to a dark green van appearing in the neighborhood, and unusual sounds coinciding with the time Nathan went missing. The first statement comes from a 13-year-old teenager living 2 blocks from the Cooper house, who says he thinks he saw a dark green van driving slowly through the Secor-Drummond intersection sometime in the mid-afternoon, possibly around school dismissal time. However, the specific time he recalls is imprecise. When asked again, he says it could have been 3:15 or 3:30 p.m., meaning close, but not exactly matching the 3:24, 3:27 p.m. window just established by the timeline. He is also unsure whether it was the same van that had been parked near the ball field the day before. The second statement comes from Mrs. Dawson, an elderly woman living in a house near where Nathan was last seen. She reports hearing a loud noise like a car door slamming hard sometime around 3-something p.m., but she did not look out the window immediately because she was in the kitchen. When asked for more details, she could only say the noise didn't sound like kids making a racket, but she doesn't remember exactly whether it was before or after 3:20 p.m. This statement is noted because it fits the description of quick behavior if the perpetrator used a motor vehicle, but the time accuracy is very low. The third group of statements, the one that drew the most attention in the file, comes from 2 residents living near the children's ball field, who claim they saw a stranger in the area the day before, and the morning of the day Nathan disappeared. One describes a middle-aged man, thin build, standing by the ball field fence, watching the kids not like a normal parent, but could not describe his face because he was too far away. The other recounts that morning, while walking her dog, she saw a woman step out of a dark-colored vehicle, stand on the sidewalk as if waiting for someone, then get back in and drive away when she noticed she was being watched. Neither statement directly ties to the exact moment Nathan vanished, but they create a context showing the area had unfamiliar people appearing who were not part of the Old Orchard community, a place where almost everyone knows each other. To assess relevance, Toledo PD creates a cross-reference table of the time and location of each statement against the standard timeline. The dark green van statement, though not minute precise, still fits location-wise. The Secker-Drummond intersection is where the K9 lost the trail, and the last point Nathan was seen. The car door slamming statement also falls within a plausible abduction time frame, as Mrs. Dawson's recollection aligns with the period when Nathan would have been passing through the area. The man at the ball field statement does not directly match the disappearance time, but it has directional value because the ball field is only a few hundred meters from Nathan's route home, and the appearance of an unfamiliar person right before the incident is unusual in a small, tight-knit community like Old Orchard. Investigators mark this statement as potentially relevant, especially when considered alongside Nathan disappearing in just a few seconds without supervision. The woman near the house statement is also placed in the group needing follow-up because, even though the timing is further off, the presence of strangers within a small radius around the Cooper home always requires close scrutiny. When these three groups of statements are plotted on the area map and overlaid with the timeline, investigators notice a common feature: all the information clusters around Drummond Road, the ball field, and the Secker-Drummond intersection, exactly matching the assessment that Nathan disappeared after going out of sight and could not have left that location on his own. However, the vagueness of each individual statement prevents Toledo PD from building a specific suspect description or identifying any particular suspicious vehicle. No one saw a license plate clearly, no one recalls an exact time, and no witness directly observed coercive behavior. The final compilation of the first witness round yields only one preliminary but directionally valuable conclusion: the area saw unfamiliar people and vehicles overlapping with Nathan's travel route. Access and departure by motor vehicle is highly credible, and the scenario of the victim leaving the neighborhood in that vehicle must be placed in the priority hypothesis group. Although the pieces of information remain fragmented and insufficient to establish a continuous sequence of actions, this environmental data layer indicates that Nathan's disappearance is unlikely to have been a random incident in a few minutes, but shows signs of premeditation by one or more unfamiliar individuals who had previously appeared in the area. Nevertheless, before expanding the investigation toward an outside suspect, Toledo PD must return to the mandatory procedure in every child missing persons case in the United States, ruling out involvement by family members and those closest to the victim. Even though this runs completely counter to the Cooper family's emotions, the internal factor check must still be conducted that very evening. 2 investigators are assigned to begin preliminary interviews with Nathan's parents to verify alibis, assess family dynamics, and rule out potential hidden violence risks. Daniel Cooper is the first to be interviewed. He states he was at the auto repair shop at the time Nathan went missing and left work immediately after receiving the call that his son hadn't come home. Investigators recheck with the shop owner and other employees. They confirm Daniel was present from the start of his shift and did not leave his position until receiving the phone call around 3:55 p.m. The time clock sheet and a repair invoice printed at 3:30 p.m. bearing Daniel's signature are also provided as objective evidence. Co-workers' time recollections match Daniel's account, significantly reducing the possibility that he could have been near the Secker-Drummond intersection during the 3:24-3:27 p.m. window. Next is Marlene. She was home from early afternoon, caring for Timothy and preparing dinner. A neighbor across the street confirms seeing her sweeping the yard and chatting with them around 2:50-3:10 p.m. before she went inside. Another person reports hearing Marlene call Nathan's name around 3:45 p.m., right when she began realizing he wasn't coming home. No evidence suggests she left the house during the time frame that could have affected Nathan. Timothy, though young, also gives a consistent statement. He saw his brother from a distance, then his brother disappeared. There was no interaction between Mom and his brother at that moment that could be misinterpreted as direct family involvement. After verifying the parents' alibis, Toledo PD extends scrutiny to close relatives including grandparents, an uncle, and 2 aunts to rule out family conflict leading to abduction or unusual interference. All are quickly interviewed over the next 2 days. The Cooper family is described as harmonious, with no history of violence. No major debts, no lawsuits or property disputes. Relationships among extended family are stable, and no one has ever shown unusual behavior toward children. One investigator also speaks directly with Nathan's teacher and friends. All describe Nathan as a cheerful child, with no signs of fear or avoidance when mentioning his parents. This is an important psychological indicator ruling out threats within the family prior to the disappearance. Toledo PD continues checking risk factors that federal statistics commonly show in child disappearances caused by family, separation, custody disputes, domestic violence, substance abuse, or parental mental health history. None of these factors match the Cooper family. Public medical records also show no one in the family has ever required mandatory treatment or exhibited dangerous behavior. Another factor checked carefully: timing. If a family member carried out an abduction, they would have had to be at the scene exactly within the 3:24–3:27 p.m. window, but all independent verifications show no one in the family could have been at the intersection at that time. No family vehicle or movement aligns with Nathan's route. Investigators, following procedure, also review the family's finances to rule out pressure or ransom motives, but bank accounts, credit cards, and transactions are all normal with no unusual withdrawals. Investigators examine the parents' behavioral consistency since Nathan's disappearance. They continuously participated in searches, cooperated fully, showed no signs of avoiding questioning or providing contradictory information. Behavior very different from cases where family members try to conceal a crime. After compiling all factors, Toledo PD reaches an official conclusion: the possibility of family involvement in Nathan's disappearance is completely ruled out. This is a necessary step to redirect the investigation outside the family, even though focusing too early on ruling out internals consumed valuable time in the initial phase. However, it is a step that cannot be skipped to ensure the integrity of the investigation and avoid early assumption bias. After completely ruling out family involvement, Toledo PD turns to the next common hypothesis in child missing cases: a runaway. Although the Cooper family insists Nathan was not the impulsive type who liked to run away or wander off, the investigative protocol at the time still requires checking all runaway possibilities before considering more serious scenarios like abduction. Initially, police compile a list of places Nathan frequented friends' homes near school, the ball field, a comic book store 3 blocks away, a small park adjacent to the neighborhood, and an empty lot where kids often gathered to build forts from branches. Each location is thoroughly searched by small teams combining police and neighborhood volunteers. The homes of Nathan's 3 closest friends are checked first. All 3 families confirm no one saw Nathan after school dismissal. The rare home camera at one friend's house, an outdoor one meant to deter bike theft, also captured no images resembling Nathan between 3 o'clock, 4 p.m. Classmates are questioned individually to verify if Nathan had any secret plans, conflicts with anyone, or mentioned wanting to go somewhere, but all give similar answers: Nathan was shy, didn't like going far without an adult, and that morning he was completely normal, even excited to show off a drawing the teacher praised. The search continues at the ball field where a witness had seen a stranger the day before Nathan disappeared. This was a place Nathan often stopped to watch older kids play ball, but from 3 p.m. to after 4 p.m. no one saw him there, and no bike tracks or items belonging to Nathan were found. Meanwhile, the small park at the end of the street is also checked. Bushes, trails, playground area, all show no sign of Nathan's presence that afternoon. Police pay particular attention to the empty lot, often a gathering spot prone to kids venturing out of adult sight on their own adventures. However, the area shows no fresh traces, and several neighborhood kids say Nathan rarely played there alone because he was afraid of stepping on broken glass or rusty nails. This personality trait indirectly indicates Nathan was not the adventurous or emotionally impulsive runaway type. Alongside location checks, Toledo PD assesses Nathan's behavioral and psychological profile to see if it fits a runaway pattern. Teachers describe him as obedient, liking routine, and prone to anxiety if schedules changed suddenly, No signs of defiance or school stress. The communication notebook records no incidents that might make him want to skip school or avoid home. Friends described Nathan as always wanting to get home on time to play with his little brother and help mom, with a habit of telling adults in advance if he planned to visit a friend and never going anywhere on his own without telling someone. From a psychological perspective, common runaway factors, family conflict, academic pressure, bullying, rebellious signs, desire for freedom, are all absent here. Instead, Nathan had strong attachment to his family, especially Timothy. This makes the likelihood of him leaving without belongings or a word extremely low. Toledo PD also compares this data to area child missing cases from prior years. Runaways typically leave preparatory signs like packing a backpack, changing clothes, leaving a note, or showing behavioral changes days before leaving. Nathan shows none of these. Even his stop at Frank's Market to buy a can of soda, a regular habit, further supports that Nathan made no changes to his daily plan and had no intention of delaying his return home. Another key factor in the assessment is timing. If Nathan ran away, the distance he could cover in the roughly 10 minutes after leaving Timothy's sight is very limited. Yet the 0.5-mile search finds no trace of his continued presence or movement. The K9 losing the trail at the intersection also shows Nathan did not continue walking or biking from that point. This contradicts the runaway model, which requires the child to actively leave the area under their own power. Combining all data on behavior, locations, timing, and social relationships, Toledo PD reaches a clear conclusion: the runaway hypothesis does not fit any of the evidence. The unit's internal report subsequently officially reclassifies the case from missing juvenile, low risk to the more serious suspected abduction, marking the first major turning point in the case. The moment authorities formally acknowledge that Nathan's disappearance is highly likely the result of external intervention rather than the child's own actions. Officially reclassifying the case as suspected abduction prompts Toledo PD to expand the search radius beyond the initial 0.5 work. And it is during this phase that the first significant piece of physical evidence is found: Nathan's bicycle. Around 6:20 p.m., a volunteer search group nearly 2 miles from the Cooper home reports to police that they spotted a child's blue bicycle propped against the edge of a small turnoff leading into a vacant lot along extended Drummond Road. A patrol unit is dispatched immediately and confirms this is indeed the bike Nathan used to ride to school on the day he disappeared. The discovery location lies outside the area Nathan could have reached on his own in the short time before vanishing. At an average 8-year-old biking speed, he could not have pedaled that far in just a few minutes, especially since the last place he was seen was near the Cooper home. Investigators examined the scene around the bike, starting with its posture and position. The front wheel faces the road, the kickstand is not down, and the bike leans slightly against low grass. This immediately rules out a simple accident. If the child had fallen, the bike would typically be thrown aside, flipped over, or leave clear skid marks on the ground. Here, however, the bike stands in a near-neat state, suggesting it was deliberately and controllably set down. The tire surface still bears dust consistent with the area's sandy soil, with no signs of hard braking or sharp turns. The surrounding ground shows no signs of struggle, no drag marks, and no personal items dropped such as a hat or backpack. Investigators photograph the scene, measure the distance from the bike to the mouth of the turnoff, and assess the possibility that the bike was moved there from near Nathan's home. The route from near the Cooper house to the discovery site includes multiple successive turns. It is very difficult for Nathan to have biked into this secluded area without being noticed, and even harder to believe an 8-year-old would choose a complicated path over his familiar route. This leads Toledo PD strongly toward the possibility that the bike was transported there by the perpetrator as a way to dispose of or misdirect evidence. Analysis of handlebar and pedal traces shows no heavy impact. The handlebars are not misaligned, and the frame has no unusual scratches. However, Investigators note that the height of the surrounding grass is sufficient to partially obscure the bike from a distance, explaining why it was not found in the first hours of searching. When viewing the discovery location on the map, an odd point emerges. This turnoff leads to a dead-end stretch with little traffic and no reason for Nathan, who always stuck to familiar paths, to bike into. The location also does not lie on any route between Frank's Market and the Cooper home. This further reinforces the hypothesis that the bike was intentionally brought here. The perpetrator's behavior in leaving the bike is evaluated in two directions. One, the perpetrator simply wanted to discard Nathan's means of transport to avoid being tracked. Two, the perpetrator deliberately placed the bike in a spot not too far from the neighborhood to suggest Nathan had moved on his own, thereby delaying investigators' recognition of the abduction nature. The fact that the bike was left neatly leaning toward the road, not fully concealed, indicates the perpetrator prioritized speed of departure over thoroughly erasing traces. To support this assessment, Toledo PD examines the road surface near the discovery site for tire marks from a larger vehicle, a clue often seen in cases where a child is placed in a car. However, the sandy soil disturbed by traffic over days leaves no clear impressions. Nevertheless, the distance from the last sighting point to where the bike appeared, nearly 2 miles, is the strongest basis for concluding that the bike could not have gotten there on its own, and that Nathan was separated from his bicycle almost immediately after passing out of his brother's sight. The bicycle's discovery far off Nathan's usual route also allows investigators to reconstruct the timeline. If the perpetrator loaded Nathan into a vehicle at the Saker intersection, then returned to drop the bike in the vacant lot, that would require both a vehicle and deliberate movement through the neighborhood. This reinforces the conclusion that Nathan's disappearance was not spontaneous, but an intentional act carried out by someone familiar with the area or confident enough to return to the scene just minutes after approaching the victim. The bicycle thus becomes the first piece of physical evidence confirming that Nathan was separated from his means of transport by external intervention, a clear sign that this is no longer a case of getting lost or running away. The unusual positioning of the bicycle, combined with the recurring detail of a dark green van in multiple witness statements, led the Toledo PD to shift the primary focus of the investigation toward a vehicle likely used to remove Nathan from the neighborhood. The investigative team immediately reviewed all collected descriptions. A teenager living in a nearby block recalled seeing a green van driving slowly around the Saker, Drummond intersection. Another resident had seen a similar vehicle parked near the ball field the day before, and Mrs. Dawson reported hearing a vehicle door slam shut forcefully right in the area where Nathan was last seen. Although no witness saw a license plate or identified the make, the descriptions of the vehicle's shape were fairly consistent: long body, high roof, sliding side door, dark green or gray-green color. Based on popular van models in Ohio during the late 1980s, investigators narrowed the possible makes to the Dodge Ram van 1983, 1987, Ford Econoline E-Series 1982, 1988, and Chevrolet G-Series from the same period. They then coordinated with the Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles to extract a list of all vehicles registered in Toledo and surrounding areas matching the color and body style. The result was 42 vehicles fitting the description. This list was compiled into a detailed table including owner's name, registered address, year of manufacture, model variant, color as noted in records, and additional information such as recent title transfers or registration changes. Although the list was fairly long, most vehicles were concentrated within a few miles of the Old Orchard area, reflecting the widespread use of vans in suburban regions at that time. The screening process was conducted in 3 steps, verifying the owner's alibi during the 3:30 p.m. time frame, checking the actual location of the vehicle on the day of the incident, and assessing risk factors related to the owner. In the first step, officers went directly to each address on the list to conduct brief interviews with the owners and household members. For those claiming to be at work, investigators requested timesheets or confirmation from supervisors. Of the 42 owners, 17 were able to prove that both they and their vehicle were far from the area at the time of the incident. Some were working at factories dozens of miles from Toledo. Some had their van in a repair shop for the entire week. Others showed the vehicle was inoperable due to mechanical issues. The second step involved physical inspection of the vehicles. Vehicles from the list were observed externally to note condition, with special attention to fresh scratches, dents, or license plate changes. Some owners refused interior inspection, but this was not immediately deemed suspicious since they had the right to refuse without a warrant. Nonetheless, notes on the level of cooperation were added to the file as a variable to help prioritize follow-up. During the inspections, investigators identified 11 owners whose schedules did not align with the incident timeline. They gave vague statements, lacked corroborating witnesses, or could not account for the vehicle's location that afternoon. These individuals were placed in the next tier for follow-up. The third step in screening was assessing risk factors related to each owner, including prior convictions for violence, offenses involving minors, documented unstable behavior in public records, or neighbor complaints. Investigators reviewed all available Toledo PD and BCI data to check which owners had recorded unusual behavior. Among the 42, only 4 had minor prior convictions, but none involved children. However, this did not fully rule them out, as statistics showed that most child abductions are committed by individuals without prior records. Police continued cross-referencing vehicle locations on the day of the incident with maps of the area and Nathan's timeline. Vehicles with no reasonable explanation for being near the Secker-Drummond intersection at that time were flagged in red. After 2 days of screening, the original 42 vehicles were narrowed to 14 that could not be definitively eliminated by clear evidence. Among these 14, 3 vehicles were rated particularly noteworthy because they converged on all 3 risk factors. The owner lacked a clear alibi, their statements conflicted with those of household members, and their home or workplace was within just a few miles of where Nathan disappeared. Toledo PD placed all 3 on the priority suspect list, marking the first substantial narrowing of focus since the case began. Although there was still no direct evidence to charge anyone, reducing the focus from 42 to 3 vehicles demonstrated that the hypothesis of the perpetrator using a vehicle to approach and leave the scene was well-founded. And it showed that even in a normally quiet residential area like Old Orchard, there were anomalous movements inconsistent with the community's daily routines. It was precisely the narrowing of the suspect vehicle list and the emergence of 3 high-risk subjects that made Toledo PD realize the case had outgrown the routine capabilities of a local department. Following federal protocol for child disappearances with suspected abduction, the PD formally requested FBI assistance, particularly from the Behavioral Science Unit, to conduct a behavioral analysis of the perpetrator based on the crime scene data and reconstructed timeline. Upon receiving the file, the BSU requested all reports from the search efforts, witness statements, the location where the bicycle was found, and the list of suspect vehicles. The behavioral analysis team began with the most critical element, the timing and manner of Nathan's disappearance. According to the BSU, the case fit the pattern of an opportunistic abduction, but with signs of minimal preparation, as evidenced by the speed of execution and the ability to remove the victim from the area without leaving significant physical traces. This ruled out impulsive, disorganized offenders who typically create commotion and leave chaotic evidence. From the way Nathan vanished within seconds after entering a blind spot, the BSU assessed that the perpetrator was likely experienced in surveillance of the target and precise timing when no adults were present. Motive was analyzed according to common behavioral patterns in the 1980s: controls, power gratification, sexual deviance, or seeking a vulnerable target for manipulation. No evidence indicated overt violence, such as screams or struggle, so the BSU concluded the offender likely used a rapid surprise approach, relying on physical advantage or verbal manipulation before applying force. Delving into the psychological profile, the BSU outlined a probable offender model very likely male, age range 30-50, the most common age group for child abductors in similar cases. Typical psychological traits included living in isolation or with limited social connections, unstable or flexible employment, allowing mobility, strong ability to conceal behavior, tendency to observe children for days before acting. The BSU also noted reports of a stranger near the ball field the previous day and the possibility that the offender had visited the neighborhood beforehand to scout the environment, identify blind spots, or gauge resident vigilance. When analyzing modus operandi, the BSU emphasized the bicycle being placed neatly in a location away from the scene. This was not the behavior of a child running away, but rather a sign the perpetrator wanted to eliminate the vehicle and create the impression the victim had left on his own. The deliberate placement, rather than throwing or hiding the bike, indicated emotional control, lack of panic, and at least minimal pre-planning. This reflected an offender capable of quick adaptation, not easily distracted by unexpected developments, and possessing a degree of confidence when acting in an open area. Regarding the 3 standout vehicles on the list, the BSU commented that the perpetrator very likely used a van because it met 3 key conditions: sufficient interior space to conceal the victim once inside, a sliding door for quick and discreet loading, and a high roof reducing visibility from outside. Vans were also a common choice for individuals seeking anonymity during that era, especially in suburban neighborhoods where such vehicles attracted little attention. The BSU further analyzed the offender's likely travel radius. Based on the timeline, if the abduction occurred around 3:24, 3:27 p.m., and the perpetrator left immediately, the window from 3:27 to 5 p.m., before the search expanded, provided ample time to exit Toledo via one of the major routes. The BSU listed 3 plausible escape directions: first, Secker Road, directly to I-475, then to I-75, heading north into Michigan or south into Ohio. Second, west via Sylvania Avenue towards sparsely populated areas and less monitored back roads. Third, east-southeast toward downtown, where heavier traffic offered cover, but also more small turnoffs to blend in. Mapping the routes, the BSU determined I-475 was the fastest option if the offender wanted to move the victim out of the immediate Old Orchard vicinity within minutes. They also assessed that the offender was likely familiar with the area, having chosen the exact timing and blind spot along Nathan's normal route home, something difficult to achieve with purely random opportunism. The proficiency of the operation, rapid approach, separating the victim from the bicycle, leaving the bike in an inconspicuous spot, suggested the perpetrator may have committed similar acts before or had at least partially planned the event. Although no direct evidence of prior offenses existed, the BSU cautioned that individuals in the child molestation abduction category often have no criminal record for a long period beforehand or move between jurisdictions to avoid detection. From all the above analysis, the BSU produced an initial psychological profile: middle-aged male, acting alone, able to approach children without raising alarm, using a dark-colored van, familiar with routes around the Secker, Drummond intersection, tendency to surveil the victim beforehand, quick and calm in handling evidence. This report immediately became the foundation for guiding the next phase of screening and identifying potential suspects among the vehicle list still under Toledo PD review, while broadening the understanding of the offender's level of dangerousness and calculation in removing Nathan from the neighborhood almost invisibly. About 2 days after the FBI began assisting Toledo PD and the behavioral analysis report reached the field, new information forced the investigation to expand toward the Maumee River area. A city sanitation worker reported that while collecting trash along a trail near an empty lot by the riverbank, he saw a child's jacket caught in low grass right at the water's edge. The location was nearly 3 road miles from the Secker-Drummond intersection, far beyond the distance Nathan could have traveled on his own, When the investigative unit arrived, they immediately recognized the jacket's bright red color, matching the description Marlene provided the evening Nathan went missing. The jacket was found midway along a gently sloping riverbank section, above which ran a seldom-used trail on weekdays. There was no fresh trash or other children's items nearby. This suggested the jacket had not drifted from elsewhere, but was most likely placed or dropped at the spot. When documenting physical characteristics, investigators noted soil dust similar to the ground near the area, the sleeves slightly damp but not fully soaked, indicating the jacket had not been there long, possibly within the past day. There were no major tears or signs of heavy pulling, only minor abrasions from brushing against bushes or the ground. The collar was slightly soiled as if lightly tugged, but these marks were too nonspecific to conclude specific behavior. Investigators, wearing specialized gloves, flipped the jacket to inspect the interior. The pockets were empty, containing none of Nathan's personal items. This aligned with the family's description that he usually carried nothing in his jacket pockets when going to school, as he kept items in his backpack. On-site experts also evaluated whether wind could have blown the jacket to the location, but ruled it out almost immediately. The weight of dew-soaked fabric and the depressed terrain made self-transport or sliding over distance unlikely. Moreover, the Maumee River's current at the time flowed in the opposite direction from the discovery point, making drift from upstream implausible. All indicators suggested someone had placed or dropped the jacket there while passing through the area. When compared with plausible escape routes the offender might have taken after abducting Nathan, the Maumee River area was not on a direct path from the scene, but was easily accessible via small connecting roads to neighboring residential zones. This increased the item's evidentiary value if deliberately discarded. It could indicate an attempt to divert search efforts. Alternatively, if it simply fell out during transport, it represented one of the rare traces left by the victim. However, Toledo PD could not draw any forensic conclusions at the time, due to limited local capabilities for DNA analysis and trace evidence. Techniques such as epithelial cell extraction or mixed DNA profiling were not yet available, and fingerprint recovery on fabric was nearly impossible by the standards of the era. Under the weak afternoon sunlight, investigators photographed the jacket from every angle, measured the distance from the waterline to its position, recorded soil temperature and humidity, then placed it in a specialized evidence bag. Preservation was handled carefully. The jacket was sealed in a plastic container and transferred to the Toledo PD evidence storage room under dry, stable conditions to prevent further degradation. A brief report was attached, potential evidence related to missing person Nathan Cooper, insufficient forensic data for conclusion, preserved for future analysis when appropriate technology becomes available. This was a strategic decision, though no one at the time could foresee its later value. In the investigators' view, the red jacket did not provide an immediate answer, but it was a rare piece that could prove Nathan had been in a location other than where he vanished. In particular, the distance from the Cooper home to the riverbank reinforced the conclusion that Nathan had been transported by motor vehicle over a distance far exceeding what an 8-year-old could cover on foot. When the jacket was logged into evidence storage and the file updated, investigators noted that it could become a key piece if future forensic technology allowed deeper analysis. Though at the time, it was only a faint sign of presence, the red jacket on the Maumee riverbank expanded the spatial scope of the case and became the first piece of evidence considered capable of directly linking Nathan to the journey out of the Old Orchard neighborhood on the afternoon he disappeared. The discovery of the jacket on the banks of the Maumee River further confirmed that the perpetrator had moved the victim across multiple locations, prompting the Toledo PD to place even greater emphasis on the list of 42 vehicles compiled in the earlier phase. The current objective was to narrow down the list of suspicious vehicles as much as possible in order to focus resources on those truly presenting a high risk. The process of eliminating 39 vehicles began with verifying the alibis of the owners through 3 data sources: direct statements, confirmation from workplaces or acquaintances, and the actual location of the vehicle during the 3:00 4 p.m. window when Nathan disappeared. The investigative team divided into smaller groups, each assigned to a specific area of Toledo for rapid contact with each vehicle owner. The first to be cleared were owners with clear, objective evidence. 12 individuals were at work in factories or offices, dozens of miles from the scene, confirmed by time clock systems or internal facility cameras. 6 others were at local garages because their vehicles were under repair or maintenance. Repair receipts and technician confirmations showed the vehicles had not left the premises all afternoon. Several other cases were eliminated because the vehicles had been used for public purposes that day. For example, 3 belonged to a local supermarket's delivery fleet with internal GPS routes, proving they had never passed through the Saker-Drummond area. When the list shrank to 20 vehicles, Toledo PD moved into deeper verification for cases where drivers could not provide solid proof. Some claimed they were at home but lacked corroborating witnesses. However, when neighbors confirmed the vehicle had not left the driveway, those vehicles were also cleared. 8 owners in this group were marked low risk after tire inspections, soil mud checks, and parking positions matched neighbor descriptions. When the list was reduced to 12 vehicles, investigators focused on cases with inconsistent statements. 4 owners gave vague accounts of their movements, with details changing across interviews. However, after the team rechecked call logs, purchase receipts, or work schedules, 3 were cleared due to matching indirect evidence. Only 1 remained in this group without any supporting proof, but his residence was quite far from the scene, so he stayed on the list without priority. At this point, the official list of suspect vehicles stood at 9. Toledo PD continued narrowing it by more closely examining vehicle appearances around the area where Nathan went missing. The team gathered additional statements from residents near the Saker-Drummond intersection, asking whether they had regularly seen any of these vehicles in the neighborhood. From this data, 6 more vehicles were eliminated because they belonged to long-term local residents whose cars were routinely parked in familiar spots and attracted no attention. This left 3 vehicles that could not be ruled out by any form of verification. All 3 belonged to owners with unclear schedules who could not prove their own or their vehicle's whereabouts at the time Nathan disappeared. The first belonged to a man living alone in a western Toledo suburb. He claimed he was at home repairing a porch awning from 3 o'clock, 4 p.m. But neighbors could not confirm this. His vehicle was usually parked in the yard, but on the follow-up check, it was found parked in an unusual position. The second belonged to a construction worker living in Perrysburg, a short drive from the scene. He stated he was driving home from a job site, but could not recall the route, had no witnesses, and local residents reported seeing his vehicle in the Old Orchard area several times the previous month. The third, and the one flagged most prominently, belonged to Arthur Whitmore, who lived in a low-rent apartment complex 4 miles from the scene. Whitmore had no clear alibi, citing driving around to clear his head, but could not describe any route. Department of Motor Vehicles records also noted that he was the only one among the 3 who had recently transferred vehicle ownership without providing detailed reasons, a behavior that often draws investigator attention, as changes in vehicle registration paperwork can sometimes indicate an intent to obscure movements. After the 3 vehicles were identified as non-excludable, Toledo PD prepared separate dossiers on each owner. These dossiers included photographs of the vehicle, owner identification information, potential movement history, initial statements, and all facts relevant to their possible presence near the scene at the time of Nathan's disappearance. Each dossier was assigned a priority level based on alignment with the FBI's behavioral analysis. Whitmore received the highest priority, while the other 2 were rated medium. Narrowing the list from 42 to 3 vehicles allowed the investigative force to determine its next focus and represented one of the rare advances in what had been a long string of days, with the case mired in ambiguity. After the list of suspect vehicles was narrowed to 3, Toledo PD shifted to analyzing the suspects based on background, travel history, and any noteworthy past behaviors of each vehicle owner. The goal of this phase was to determine which of the three most closely matched the behavioral profile provided by the BSU, while ruling out mismatches with objective evidence. The first suspect was the man living alone in the western Toledo suburb, employed at a small auto shop. Background checks revealed no criminal record, only minor traffic violations such as speeding and illegal parking. Neighbors described him as reclusive, rarely leaving home and almost never receiving visitors. However, his schedule on the day Nathan disappeared initially raised suspicion due to the lack of witnesses. Upon deeper review, Toledo PD discovered a purchase receipt from a building supply store 12 miles from his home, timestamped 2:58 p.m. Although low-quality exterior store cameras showed his van leaving the lot around 3:05 p.m. in the opposite direction from Old Orchard, this made his presence near Secker Drummond between 3:24–3:27 p.m. virtually impossible. When cross-referenced with nearby gas station data, the system recorded a fuel purchase at 3:22 p.m., placing him in an entirely different location at the critical time. Conclusion: the first suspect was eliminated. The second suspect was the construction worker living in Perrysburg. He had an extensive travel history due to his job, frequently driving across various areas around Toledo. Some residents had previously reported seeing his vehicle in Old Orchard the month before, making him noteworthy. However, when investigators requested detailed work schedules, the construction company confirmed that on the day Nathan disappeared, he was assigned to a site more than 20 miles from the city, with time clock entries at 3:10 p.m. and 4:45 p.m. Company site cameras captured the work truck passing through the gate at those times, and although it was not his personal van, his presence at the workplace was corroborated by at least 3 other workers. Investigators further cross-checked traffic maps. Traveling from the site back to Old Orchard took a minimum of 35–40 minutes, making it impossible for him to have been at the Secker Drummond intersection before 3:27 p.m. Another point reinforcing his elimination was that his personal van was not in use that day. A neighbor confirmed it remained parked in the driveway all afternoon. Therefore, the second suspect was removed from the list. Meanwhile, the third suspect, Arthur Whitmore, became the central focus of the investigation because no strong evidence could rule him out, and he matched the most elements of the FBI's behavioral profile. Whitmore lived in an old apartment complex on the east side of Toledo, frequently changed jobs, had no stable occupation, and tax records showed low and irregular income. Neighbors described him as extremely private, rarely interacting, occasionally leaving at odd hours, mostly at night. Many in the building did not even realize he lived there until police came asking questions. Background checks noted several minor past infractions, disorderly conduct in 1983, a small neighbor dispute in 1985, and 1 warning for improper parking. No serious criminal history existed, but these incidents indicated an erratic temperament. The most notable point was his account of his whereabouts on the day Nathan disappeared. Whitmore said he drove around to relax his mind, but could not describe any route, destination, or person who could confirm it. His statement changed twice, first mentioning the eastern suburbs, then the downtown area, making it difficult for investigators to believe. During vehicle inspection, investigators noted that the tires carried soil similar to the type found along the Maumee riverbank, where Nathan's jacket was recovered. While not direct evidence, since that soil type appeared in many Toledo locations, the coincidence was documented. DMV records showed Whitmore had transferred vehicle ownership less than a month before Nathan's disappearance without providing a clear reason. This is a behavior commonly seen in subjects attempting to hinder vehicle tracking. Residents' history checks revealed Whitmore had moved repeatedly over the past 5 years, staying only a few months at each address before leaving without forwarding information. Some previous addresses were near areas where children had reportedly been approached, though not fully reported incidents, as recounted by local residents when questioned. When compared to the BSU behavioral analysis, Whitmore matched numerous factors: middle-aged male, living alone, unstable employment, pattern of mobility, avoidance of social interaction, and capability to surveil targets without drawing attention. The inconsistencies in his statements and complete lack of alibi made him the most prominent suspect among the remaining three. Toledo PD compiled a detailed investigative file on Whitmore, including residence history, administrative documents, timeline cross-references, and analysis of the likelihood that he operated a van at the scene during Nathan's disappearance window. Although no direct incriminating evidence existed, the cumulative indirect data indicated he required the highest priority monitoring, and from that point onward, Arthur Whitmore officially became the primary suspect in the abduction of Nathan Cooper. Over the next 6 months after Arthur Whitmore became the primary suspect, Toledo PD devoted the majority of its resources to following every lead connected to him, but the results led to a prolonged period of deadlock. Whitmore virtually vanished from Toledo just weeks after Nathan disappeared. Rental records at the old apartment complex confirmed he had left abruptly without notice, leaving the unit nearly empty, except for a few worthless old items. Addresses listed on vehicle and administrative records were all short-term stays, and when investigators checked them, no one had specific information about where he went after leaving the complex. Bank system searches yielded nothing. Whitmore had no active stable accounts and used cash for most transactions, consistent with an evasive lifestyle. Toledo PD scoured parking lots, private garages, and low-cost rooming houses across the city. But no location recorded a matching license plate or description since the end of the second month after the incident. Weeks passed, and the search expanded to small towns around Toledo and neighboring counties, yet no trace of his presence emerged. Meanwhile, efforts to find new physical evidence also stalled. After the jacket and bicycle, no additional items, clothing, or physical traces appeared. Search teams were redeployed in multiple sweeps, including riverbanks, vacant land, and low-traffic back roads, but none produced new leads. Toledo's terrain, with residential areas interspersed among wilderness patches and a tangled network of trails, made searching extremely difficult, especially as time eroded initial traces. Many locations were researched repeatedly, with no new findings. In that context, the volunteer search team formed by local residents, which had been very active in the early weeks, also began to weaken. Initially, hundreds joined weekend searches, dividing by maps and using flashlights, bicycles, and even small boats along the Maumee River. But as time passed with zero results, fatigue and helplessness caused volunteer numbers to dwindle. After 3 months, only a few small groups continued, mostly people connected to the Cooper family. By the 6th month, the volunteer search effort had almost completely dissolved, leaving only sporadic, small-scale attempts insufficient to generate meaningful progress. Community sentiment also shifted markedly. Initial panic gave way to discouragement, then to a lingering fear. Some residents believed the perpetrator was no longer in the area. Others thought he remained nearby, but was exceptionally skilled at concealment. The lack of investigative progress led many to question the competence of the Toledo PD, even though the force had exhausted nearly all available resources. The Cooper family endured the most grueling phase. Hope diminished daily. They clung to every vague community tip, then faced disappointment when nothing materialized into a real lead. Daniel continued posting missing person flyers across Toledo and nearby small towns, while Marlene attended every community meeting, only to leave in despair each time. Timothy, though still young, was deeply affected by the prolonged loss of his brother without resolution. From an investigative standpoint, the failure to locate Whitmore was the greatest setback. He remained the only non-excludable suspect, yet every effort to pinpoint his whereabouts ended in dead ends. The absence of new physical evidence further drained momentum from the case, as all existing data stemmed from the early phase, with nothing to reinforce or expand the investigative scope. The longer time passed, the sharper the drop in the ability to trace physical evidence, and no new witnesses provided valuable additional information. 6 months after Nathan's disappearance, the case had fallen into complete stagnation, with 3 major knots still untangled. No victim located, no perpetrator found, and no fresh leads to redirect the investigation. In internal records, Toledo PD documented this as the most serious impasse phase of the case, and without a breakthrough, the entire investigation risked entering a prolonged frozen state. After 6 months of continuous investigation without achieving any significant progress, the Toledo PD was forced to make a decision that no law enforcement agency ever wants to make: transferring the Nathan Cooper missing persons case file to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation with the official classification cold case, active review. This decision reflected the severe stagnation of the case as well as the exhaustion of investigative resources at the city level. In the final internal meeting before handing over the file, the investigators summarized the entire process from the estimated date of Nathan's disappearance, analyzing the strengths, weaknesses, and possible errors that may have affected the ability to locate the boy. The summary report identified 3 major errors in the early phase. First, misjudging the level of danger when receiving the initial report. Classifying the incident as missing juvenile, low risk in the first hour prevented urgent measures such as expanding the search radius, establishing road checkpoints, and deploying additional personnel from being implemented at the right time. The critical golden window, the most important period in child disappearance cases, was used ineffectively, allowing the perpetrator to potentially leave the area undetected. The second error was that while the immediate area search was deployed quickly, it lacked strategic linkage with roadway data, so on-scene personnel did not recognize the risk that the perpetrator had placed Nathan in a motor vehicle and driven away just a few hundred meters from the last sighting. When the K-9 lost the trail at the Secker intersection, the failure to immediately expand the search to the 3 nearby major routes, especially the I-475 exit, was considered one of the key oversights. The third error concerned the handling of witness information. Although the Toledo PD had recorded statements about a dark green van and the sound of a vehicle door slamming shut, these 2 pieces of information were not given proper weight in the initial hours. They should have raised the probability of abduction, but instead they were treated as secondary details. This delayed the reclassification of the case to suspected abduction, giving the perpetrator additional time advantage. The Ohio BCI received the case with a file more than 400 pages thick, including search maps, witness statements, profiles of 3 vehicle suspects, and the FBI's behavioral analysis. However, upon reviewing all the data, BCI experts acknowledged that the case had almost no clear leads for next steps. There was no direct eyewitness to the abduction, no cameras from that time captured images, and no clear physical evidence beyond the bicycle and jacket. 2 items that could not be deeply analyzed with the forensic technology available at the time. In particular, the primary suspect Arthur Whitmore had completely vanished from Toledo, and the absence of financial trails, vehicle records, or personal activity made him a shadow that BCI could not pursue on any lead. The BCI file noted that the case lacked forensic vectors, meaning no chain of physical evidence to expand the investigation, and lacked witness vectors, meaning no new statements had emerged, despite widespread public dissemination of the case. When the case officially transitioned to cold case status, local media coverage thinned out, the frequency of sharing missing posters dropped sharply, and community attention shifted to other issues. This plunged the Cooper family into a period of despair more profound than at any previous point. The fragile hope in the early months that Nathan might be found within 2 miles of home, in an empty lot, or even held somewhere in Toledo, was gradually replaced by the harsh silence of a cold case, a tacit acknowledgement that time had slipped beyond their control. Daniel Cooper continued his habit of posting flyers around the city, but the number of places allowing posters steadily decreased. Each time he returned to replace old flyers, the paper had worn thin, been erased by rain, or been removed for unknown reasons. These actions, once carried out with neighbors' support, now became something Daniel did alone. Marlene fell into prolonged anxiety, attending support meetings for families of missing children, but often leaving midway because she could not bear the pressure of hearing similar stories. Timothy, then only 5 years old, began showing signs of sleep disturbances, fear of the dark, and constantly clinging to his mother out of an obsession that he too might disappear like his brother. The Toledo PD investigators, though no longer the lead agency, continued to update the case as requested by BCI, but they admitted that every avenue led to a dead end of data. In one internal report, an investigator wrote, "We have nowhere to go next, no one to look for, no evidence to analyze. Every direction has been pursued, and every one has closed." This was also the point at which the case file first included the official cold case description: investigation temporarily suspended due to lack of new evidence, but remains open to receive any newly developed information. For the Cooper family, those words came close to meaning that their son had been swallowed by time. Although the Ohio BCI took over the case with greater specialized standards, in reality they could not produce progress immediately, or even in the many years that followed, eroding the family's faith in justice. By the end of the 6th month since the incident, the entire initial investigative phase officially closed in complete deadlock, marking the transition of the Nathan Cooper case from an urgent disappearance to one of the most persistent unsolved files in Toledo at that time. 10 years passed since the day Nathan Cooper disappeared. The case file lay dormant in the Ohio BCI Cold Case Archive, only mentioned during periodic reviews or when a community report recalled it as one of the most mysterious disappearances in Toledo from the late 1980s. By 1998, in an effort to restructure the unit handling unsolved cases, BCI appointed a new investigator, Rebecca Collins, who had experience with complex files and above-average skills in detailed analysis. Upon receiving the hundreds of pages thick file, Collins spent weeks reading every document, including the original timeline, witness reports, FBI behavioral analysis, profiles of the 3 suspects, and all seized evidence. The 10-year time gap inadvertently became an advantage. Collins was unaffected by the emotional pressure of the early phase and could view the case with completely fresh eyes. During her review, she recreated the map of Nathan's route on the day he vanished, copying every blind spot and overlaying the locations of evidence, such as the bicycle and jacket. She also examined all witness statements in chronological order, underlining inconsistencies or descriptions that had never been deeply checked. However, what caught her attention most was in Arthur Whitmore's file, the one-time primary suspect who had been dropped when he disappeared. The file showed that Toledo PD had pursued Whitmore through multiple means, checking residences, bank accounts, vehicles, family contacts, but no one had thoroughly examined his chain of temporary addresses and workplaces prior to 1988, many of which were only recorded superficially. When Collins requested a full extraction of his residences in the 8 years before the case, she noticed an anomaly. A rental cabin in the rural outskirts of Findlay, about 40 miles from Toledo, had appeared in Whitmore's records roughly a year before Nathan disappeared. What unford percofia Nathan of the far. But with though, turning Tedby send, charity. The sud of the cabin was documented in a short-term 3-month lease transaction, but Whitmore's departure time coincided with his move to an apartment in Toledo. Strangely, the cabin had never been investigated or even noted further in the case file, possibly overlooked or deemed irrelevant due to the geographic distance. But when Collins cross-referenced Whitmore's behavioral data, she saw that the cabin fit his pattern of temporary moves and even aligned with a statement classified as low priority. In 1988, a Findlay resident had reported seeing a dark green van appear several times near the old cabin. But because it was not directly tied to Toledo, the information was not pursued. Another document also stood out, a receipt for rough repair supplies from a store near Findlay, dated exactly during the period Whitmore was renting the cabin. Toledo PD had recorded it in the suspect's purchase records, but never cross-checked it with the actual location. Collins flagged the cabin as a point to check, because from her perspective, any isolated space within the suspect's travel pattern could hold value, especially given his tendency toward isolated living and choosing remote locations. Continuing her review, Collins discovered that the former owner of the cabin, who sold the property several years after Whitmore left, had noted in a transaction log that some interior items were damaged. There were strange scratches on the wood floor and windows, and the cabin showed signs of having its lock reinforced from the inside. This note had never appeared in the case file, possibly because Toledo PD at the time did not consider Findlay relevant and therefore did not seek permission to inspect the property or track down the former owner. To Collins, this was a serious omission. An isolated cabin, with a modified lock, linked to a suspect once named in an abduction case file, all were signals that could not be ignored. In an internal report to BCI leadership, Collins wrote that the Nathan Cooper case file was only analyzed near the Toledo scene, while some indirect elements suggest the scope needs to be expanded beyond the city. She recommended rechecking the cabin in Findlay, even knowing the chances of finding evidence after 10 years were very low. But the key point was that the cabin had never been searched, meaning any trace that once existed there, even if faded, remained the first new source of information since the case had gone cold. The moment Collins realized the cabin had been overlooked was the first time in many years that the Nathan Cooper case had a completely new investigative direction, not based on scene evidence, not from new witness statements, but from rereading old files with a different perspective, something that in many cold cases often becomes the decisive factor in reassembling lost pieces. Immediately after her proposal to check the Findlay cabin was approved, Rebecca Collins contacted the current owner for permission to access the property. The current owner, who had purchased the place in the mid-1990s, was surprised to hear the cabin might be connected to an unsolved disappearance, but agreed to cooperate. When Collins arrived with 2 BCI investigators, they began by documenting all exterior features: a single-story wooden cabin, isolated amid sparse woods, about a mile from the main road. The structure was simple, but showed signs of replaced windows and reinforced framing in places, matching earlier transaction notes. Because the cabin had passed through multiple owners, finding direct traces from 1987, 1988 was extremely difficult. But the investigators proceeded with full protocol. Upon entering, they noted the basic layout: a small main room, a narrow back room, and a simple kitchen. The current owner said the cabin had sat vacant for several years before they bought it, then was repainted and repaired for use as a weekend retreat. However, some areas had seen little intervention from the current owners, particularly the old wooden floor beneath the carpet and the wall near the back room window. Collins immediately requested the carpet be removed. The loose carpet revealed the original wood floor with numerous small, uneven scratches of varying depths, some resembling marks from a sharp object being dragged, others like friction from clothing or items. Though these could not be dated, they supported the hypothesis that the cabin had been used before the current owners. In the back room, just large enough for a small bed, the investigators found more intriguing traces on the wooden wall. At a height corresponding to a child aged 6 to 10, were several thin scratches, several centimeters long, not accidental knife marks, but repeated scoring with a sharp object. Some scratches resembled simple characters or patterns. Collins documented each one, as such marks often appear in cases of prolonged child confinement. Children scoring walls to mark time or release emotion. In the corner of the room, against the baseboard, an investigator found a small piece of pale green chalk. Though crumbled and dampened over years, the color was still identifiable. Next to it was a small, roughly shaped piece of wood, resembling the remnant of a handmade toy or broken block. The current owner confirmed they had never brought children there, and the items were not theirs. To Collins, this was the most significant discovery: signs of child-related items remaining, despite multiple owners and renovations, indicated a high likelihood that a child had been present there during a period before the place was abandoned. However, none of these materials, chalk, wood, scratches, could be confirmed as belonging to Nathan. There were no unique identifiers, no writing, no personal items tied to the boy. Moreover, the cabin had been vacant and exposed to the elements for long periods, making any biological traces that once existed virtually irrecoverable. A section of the kitchen, where previous owners had replaced the sink and wooden cabinets, was also inspected. Investigators found 2 rusty nails and an old piece of rope in a storage drawer, but these could simply be remnants of prior repairs. Still, Collins added them to the list of items to document, as the cabin was the first place in the entire investigation to show even the smallest signs related to a child. Behind the cabin, the team extended the search to the wooded area within a few meters radius. Some spots with unusually compacted soil were noted, but 10 years made it impossible to determine whether they were old digging marks or natural terrain changes. Collins closely examined the screws around the backroom window frame and noticed some were of mismatched types, suggesting reinforcement with different tools. This aligned with reports that Whitmore had purchased repair materials during his rental period. It did not prove the cabin was used to hold someone, but it strengthened the inference that he had deliberately modified the cabin for his own purposes, not ordinary habitation. After nearly a full day of examination, Collins and the team reached a preliminary conclusion. The Findlay cabin contained multiple indicators that a child had once been present. Wall scratches at child height, colored chalk remnants, toy-like materials, and window repair signs. But no direct evidence identified that child as Nathan Cooper. The cabin was not overlooked, simply due to initial disappointment. It became the first piece signaling that the abduction might involve locations outside Toledo's immediate area, and that Whitmore, who had rented the cabin, may have used the place for purposes beyond temporary lodging. Though the cabin provided no definitive answers, the existence of child-related traces was the first progress in many years of no change to the case, and it served as the basis for broadening the view of the suspect's movements in the subsequent phase. In 2018, 3 decades after Nathan Cooper disappeared, and exactly 20 years since the last search at the Findlay cabin, a major advancement in forensic science opened up an opportunity that investigators had been unable to imagine for many years: the widespread adoption of high-sensitivity DNA analysis technology, including techniques for separating trace cell mixtures and amplifying genetic sequences from long-adhered samples on fabric. When the Ohio BCI launched its program to reevaluate backlogged evidence from cold cases, the red jacket found on the banks of the Maumee River was placed on the priority list because it was the only piece of evidence likely to contain biological traces from the victim or the perpetrator. Even though, when collected in 1988, the technology of the time did not allow DNA extraction, the jacket was retrieved from the evidence storage facility, where it had remained untouched in a sealed box for 30 years, and transferred to the BCI's modern laboratory for comprehensive analysis. Forensic technicians began by examining the fabric structure, identifying areas most likely to retain epithelial cells, typically the collar, cuffs, and inner hems, where fibers easily trap cells upon contact. Samples were collected using a moist cell separation method to avoid damaging the already degraded small DNA molecules over time. The samples were then processed through next-generation STR techniques, enabling DNA amplification at levels impossible for 1988 laboratories. 2 days later, the preliminary results immediately captured the attention of both the analysis team and the BCI Cold Case Investigative Unit. The jacket contained at least 2 distinct DNA profiles. The first was the DNA of a child, consistent with Nathan's age at the time of disappearance, based on specific genetic markers compared against the additional family DNA profiles collected by BCI under updated protocols. The match was not sufficient for absolute positive identification due to degradation after 30 years, but the high degree of compatibility led investigators to conclude that this profile was almost certainly from Nathan or a closely related child. However, it was the second profile that shifted the case from long-term stalemate to potentially reopened for investigation: the DNA of an unidentified adult that matched no one in the Cooper family and did not hit the CODIS database at the time of analysis. This adult DNA was located on the cuff and collar areas, positions suggesting direct contact, possibly from someone who handled, pulled, or lifted the jacket during events related to Nathan's disappearance. The adult profile contained enough markers for future identification if matched to a specific individual, but at that point it was only noted as unknown adult male-female contributor because the mixed cellular components prevented fully accurate sex determination. The laboratory report was immediately forwarded to the BCI Cold Case Unit, and investigator Collins, who had continued to monitor the case despite being assigned many other files by then. For Collins, the presence of an adult DNA profile on the jacket, found at a location far from where Nathan vanished, was highly promising evidence indicating that the victim had been in close contact with at least one other individual after leaving the Old Orchard area. This was the first piece of forensic evidence in 3 decades, with the potential to lead to the perpetrator or at least clarify Nathan's movements after 3:27 p.m. on the day he disappeared. In an emergency meeting to evaluate the results, BCI immediately decided to fully reactivate the case with 3 objectives: identify the adult who left the DNA, verify whether the child DNA profile could be matched to any records in medical or social systems, and investigate the possibility that the jacket had been moved through other locations before ending up on the Maumee riverbank. This decision marked the first time in over a decade that the case was elevated from active review to active investigation, a rare status for a decades-old missing persons file. BCI began by conducting deeper analysis of the mixed DNA sample using YSTR techniques to determine the likelihood of a male contributor. Although not conclusive for identity, the results strongly suggested the adult was male, consistent with the behavioral profile prepared by the FBI in 1988. In parallel with the forensic work, Collins re-reviewed the 1988 scene reports to assess whether the jacket might have been moved through multiple locations before reaching the riverbank. She noted that the jacket remained relatively intact and had not been swept away by the current, suggesting intentional placement. Its discovery location, along a secluded trail segment, led Collins to hypothesize that the jacket may have been discarded during the perpetrator's departure from Toledo. Based on the new forensic findings, BCI established an expanded investigative profile, including comparisons of the adult DNA to any individuals who had appeared in the scope of suspicion, whether in weak statements, vehicle lists, or residency records near the Findlay cabin. The adult DNA data was entered into CODIS for future automated matching, as by 2018, the National DNA Database Update model was rapidly expanding, and the possibility of a future hit was entirely realistic. The emergence of the unidentified DNA profile forced BCI to reassess the geographic scope of the case. If the jacket had traveled many miles from the original scene, it suggested the perpetrator was not limited to the Toledo area, but may have operated over a much wider range. Investigator Collins immediately requested a reopening of all reports concerning vehicles observed near the Maumee River area in the days following the disappearance, even though the likelihood of finding new witnesses after 3 decades was near zero. Nevertheless, the DNA evidence fundamentally changed how the case was perceived. It was no longer a missing persons case with passive evidence, but one with direct biological traces, suggesting interaction between the victim and an adult at or before the jacket was discarded. The official BCI report concluded, the 2018 DNA analysis represents the first forensic breakthrough of value in the Nathan Cooper case. The jacket evidence is no longer merely a forgotten piece of fabric, but a genetic marked item that may lead to the identity of the victim or the person who took him away. With these results, the Nathan Cooper case officially emerged from its long dormancy and entered a new investigative phase. For the first time in 3 decades, there was a concrete direction to pursue the truth behind the mysterious disappearance of the 8-year-old boy in 1988. In November 2019, less than a year after BCI entered the jacket DNA into CODIS, an automatic notification was sent to the Ohio Investigative System. Cleveland PD had collected a DNA sample from a 39-year-old homeless man during a medical intake for temporary shelter registration, and the sample produced a strong match with the child DNA profile on the red jacket linked to Nathan Cooper's disappearance. The notification did not include a name, only a biological code, sample collection date, and conclusion. High probability kinship match potential same individual. This immediately drew the attention of the BCI cold case team, because the 39-year-old man had a birth year of 1980, corresponding to Nathan's actual age if he had survived the 3 decades. Cleveland PD reported that the man was found in a state of mild altered consciousness, without identification, unable to recall his name, unclear about prior residences, and lacking any medical history. He was discovered near the abandoned West 25th Street train station, wandering in disorientation, speaking slowly, and responding only to very simple questions. What caught the attention of social workers was that he did not know his age and could only recall fragmented images, a small dark room, damp wood smell, dripping water sound, and a green vehicle. As per protocols for assisting homeless individuals, a basic medical check was performed, including DNA collection for identification against missing persons records, and that sample triggered the automatic CODIS match with Nathan's jacket evidence. Upon receiving the notification, Collins immediately contacted Cleveland PD for additional details. Initial records showed the man had no signs of substance addiction, no acute injuries beyond some old scars on his wrists and ankles. Locations noteworthy because they aligned with areas where Nathan was suspected to have been restrained when separated from his bicycle in 1988. Psychologists noted that the man communicated very minimally, consistent with someone who had lived in prolonged isolation, unaccustomed to social contact, with slow reflexes but no signs of self-harm. When asked about his past, he only mentioned a man named A and a cabin in the woods. Though vague, these 2 details made Collins nearly certain that the DNA match had located a survivor, but confirmation was required. BCI requested extended DNA analysis, comparison of the Cleveland sample with the Cooper family DNA collected in 2018. Results returned after 48 hours, 99.998% match with Daniel and Marlene Cooper. In a parent-child relationship pattern, the expert report concluded, individual is biologically consistent with being Nathan Cooper, missing since 1988. When Cleveland PD received this information, an emergency exchange between the 2 agencies was initiated. They confirmed that the man had been temporarily admitted to psychiatric care for cognitive assessment. The attending physician reported severely fragmented memory, especially long-term recall. Many memory segments were discontinuous or lacked chronological order. Nevertheless, he described certain recurring memories, dim light filtering through wooden doors, the sound of locks turning repeatedly, a small low-ceilinged room, and occasionally the noise of a vehicle engine nearby. Most notably, when Cleveland PD showed him an illustration of a dark green 1980s van, he paused longer than usual and said very quietly, "I know this vehicle." Other fragmented descriptions included sensations of being transported over long stretches of road, recalling a deep-voiced man, and a constant feeling of being locked up. His psychological state aligned with clinical findings common in individuals subjected to prolonged isolation in confined environments with minimal social contact, light, or auditory stimulation. In-depth analysis revealed strong startle responses to the sound of metal doors, slamming and flashlight beams, 2 elements frequently associated with rudimentary confinement or cramped spaces. The 2019 records noted that when asked his name, he either did not respond or repeatedly said, "Don't remember." However, when a clinician read a random list of names aloud and reached Nathan, he startled noticeably, looked up more quickly than usual, but did not confirm it as his name. Though this was one of the rare emotional reactions observed during the entire evaluation. Given the near-conclusive DNA results, BCI declared the homeless man found in Cleveland to be Nathan Cooper, the victim who disappeared in 1988. This was the first time in 31 years that evidence indicated Nathan was still alive. Once this information reached the BCI cold case unit, Collins immediately reopened the full file under survivor-victim investigative protocols, preparing legal procedures to transfer Nathan to specialized care facilities and initiating the new phase of the case. The discovery of Nathan not only proved he had survived many years of disappearance, but also opened an entirely new investigative avenue, locating where he had been held, identifying the adult whose DNA was on the jacket, and reconstructing the 3-decade journey of Nathan's disappearance. Something no one had ever imagined possible in a cold case of this duration. Immediately after the DNA results strengthened the likelihood that the homeless man in Cleveland was Nathan Cooper, Ohio. BCI proceeded with comprehensive forensic confirmation to issue a definitive legal conclusion. Multi-layered verification is a mandatory requirement in cold cases involving long-term surviving victims, especially when the individual has fragmented awareness and cannot independently provide identifying information. BCI coordinated with Cleveland PD to transport Nathan to the Ohio State Forensic Center for a 3-part evaluation: dental, skeletal, old trauma, and fingerprint analysis. In the initial phase, dental records became the most critical comparison basis because Nathan had received regular pediatric dental care in Toledo prior to 1988. Fortunately, the clinic's database still retained Nathan's final X-rays, including his primary teeth structure, mild malposition of the left premolar, and a small filling on tooth #4. When current X-rays were taken, forensic odontologists determined that the 39-year-old man exhibited the same distinctive dental eruption pattern, persistent axial deviation of the left premolar into adulthood, root structure matching past films, and the filling position unchanged from the 1988 records. The match rate exceeded 95%, considered strong evidence in forensic identification. Next was skeletal analysis and old trauma comparison. According to childhood medical records, Nathan had suffered a left wrist fracture at age 7 after a playground fall. The healed bone was recorded as not perfectly straight, leaving a slight curve near the distal radius. Full hand X-rays of the homeless man revealed this healing signature in near-perfect positional, angular, and pattern alignment. Additionally, 1986 records noted a minor right ankle crack from slipping on stairs. CT imaging of the man's foot showed a bone scar in the exact described location. These are unfalsifiable traces that further reinforced identity. Morphological assessment also showed numerous consistencies: arm to forearm length ratios, slight temporal left depression, and shoulder width proportions, all fell within allowable growth extrapolated ranges from Nathan's age 8 measurements. Another key detail, though minor, was significant. Childhood photos of Nathan showed a faint mole below his right clavicle. Examination confirmed the same mole in the same location on the found man, albeit faded with age. Combining all 3 evidence groups, dental, skeletal, stroma, and fingerprints, BCI issued its conclusion report. Legal identification: the individual located in Cleveland, Ohio, is Nathan Cooper, born 1980, missing from Toledo in 1988. The 37-page report was forwarded to Cleveland PD, the Lucas County Prosecutor's Office, and the Cooper family in preparation for formal identification procedures. After more than 3 decades, law enforcement was able for the first time to declare full, independent forensic evidence beyond DNA confirming that Nathan was still alive. This was a turning point not only for the cold case file, but for Ohio's forensic system as a whole, demonstrating that preserved evidence and old records can yield unexpected value as technology advances. With the legal conclusion approved, the Nathan Cooper case status changed from missing person presumed abducted to recovered victim. Ongoing criminal investigation, meaning all subsequent steps, would focus on identifying and apprehending the person responsible for holding him for so many years. The family reunion was scheduled to take place in a special visitation room at the BCI Victim Support Center in Columbus, under the supervision of forensic psychologists, investigators, and legal representatives, to ensure both Nathan's safety and the preservation of the investigation's integrity. Daniel and Marlene Cooper were officially notified 3 days before the meeting. Both underwent multiple preparatory psychological counseling sessions for the possibility that their son, now a 39-year-old man, might not recognize them or might react in unpredictable ways due to the psychological trauma from prolonged captivity. Timothy, Nathan's younger brother, now 36 years old, was also invited to participate, but was advised to initially take an observer role to avoid emotionally overwhelming Nathan. When the reunion day arrived, the oversight team arranged the room with soft lighting and chairs placed at a distance to give Nathan a sense of no pressure for physical contact. He was brought in first, in a state of mild alertness, his hands clasped together as an ingrained habit to self-soothe. Collins and a psychologist sat beside him, ensuring every step proceeded slowly and under control. A few minutes later, Daniel and Marlene were brought in. Both immediately burst into tears upon seeing their son, but they were instructed to keep their distance to avoid triggering a sudden fearful reaction. Daniel could not stop trembling, while Marlene raised her hand to her mouth to stifle sobs. The image before them was at once familiar and heartbreakingly strange. Nathan looked at them with an inscrutable expression, as if trying to piece together fragmented memories into the present reality. He did not react strongly, but his eyes clearly wavered, a mix of unfamiliarity blended with some vague, unnameable feeling. The psychologist gently introduced, "They are your family." Nathan bowed his head, squeezing his hands tightly, a sign of tension, but not rejection. Marlene was permitted to take one step forward, her voice trembling. "Nathan, it's Mom." Those were the words she had thought she would never speak again. Nathan did not reply, but his gaze lingered on her face longer, as if recognizing something familiar in the features that time had altered. Daniel spoke very softly, "Son, we've been looking for you for 31 years. Nathan tilted his head slightly, his expression shifting between confusion and pain. After a moment, he spoke the first words since the reunion began. "I don't know." Just 2 words, but clear evidence that his memories were not continuous. That this reunion could not unfold like the touching scenes often seen in the news. The specialist signaled for everyone to maintain a slow pace. Marlene asked permission to sit down so as not to create height pressure. Daniel followed suit, struggling to stay calm even as his heart felt like it would break. Timothy, standing behind the one-way glass, burst into tears upon hearing his brother's voice. A voice he only remembered faintly from childhood fragments. Over nearly an hour, the conversation progressed slowly but steadily. Marlene shared memories from when Nathan was little. How the boy used to laugh when going out to the playground, his habit of shrugging when embarrassed, his preference for apples over candy. Nathan listened, sometimes blinking rapidly as a reflex when memories were stirred. At times he winced, placing a hand to his temple, showing signs of information overload. Daniel recounted how long they had searched, how many posters they had put up in rain and snow, how many people they had spoken to, just hoping someone would spot a trace of their son. Nathan shed a few tears, his first visible emotional response, indicating he was not entirely severed from his emotional roots. But he also stated clearly, in a halting voice, "I don't remember family, don't remember home. I only remember small room, locked door, green car." Those key words caused the room to fall silent, reminding everyone that this reunion was not just a moment of joy, but also a door opening to what Nathan had endured in darkness for 3 decades. The psychologist explained to the family that individuals subjected to long-term captivity often develop a form of memory dissociation disorder in which pre-abduction memories are frozen and memories from the period of isolation become the primary framework of perception. Nathan's lack of full recognition of his parents was not a sign of rejection, but a psychological defense mechanism formed over time. As the meeting extended into the second hour, the specialist allowed Daniel to present a familiar object, a small metal toy car that Nathan had once loved dearly. Daniel had kept it for 31 years, as a piece of memory he refused to let fade. When Nathan saw the car, he had a distinct reaction, a deep inhale, eyes widening, hands trembling slightly. Though not a complete memory, it was the first time during the meeting he showed a sign of emotional connection to a childhood recollection. The reunion concluded in a state of both anticipation and fragility. Nathan was escorted back to the medical room to rest, while the family received extended counseling to prepare for subsequent phases, that rebuilding the relationship would take time, that this reunion was not an ending, but the beginning of an unpredictable healing journey. BCI also had to plan for carefully questioning the victim. Nathan was the sole living witness to the case, but his psychological endurance was severely limited. All questions had to follow a layered exchange protocol to avoid triggering traumatic memories too rapidly. Forensic specialists began compiling a timeline of events based on Nathan's fragmented statements, from small room damp wood smell, water sound, to green car, in preparation for later statement analysis. For the time being, BCI prioritized stabilizing the victim's mental state and supporting the family through the emotional shock of a reunion that did not fully meet expectations. Nathan Cooper had returned, but 31 years of disappearance had blurred the boundary between family and memory, and the journey to re-establish that connection would require resilience, patience, and further investigative steps to illuminate the stolen years of his life. Immediately after the reunion, the BCI investigative team launched the most critical phase, reconstructing the 31 years Nathan was missing. Based on fragmented data gathered from social welfare records, hospitals, shelters, homeless support centers, and administrative sources, the 39-year-old man had passed through, under various aliases, or no name at all. Since Nathan could not recall most of what happened, BCI had to start from the very place where Cleveland PD found him, then trace backward through any surviving administrative traces. Prior to 2012, automated records were almost non-existent because Nathan lived off the grid: no insurance registration, no formal income, no fixed address, and frequently fell into the category of unidentified transients that shelters recorded only by physical description. However, one factor provided investigative direction: Nathan's identifying features, the scar on his left wrist and right ankle. Two physical signs consistent with childhood injuries appeared in scattered medical records across Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. BCI created a timeline of all instances where medical facilities recorded a man with similar scars, matching build, estimated age 25 to 40, and a habit of not providing a name. These points began forming a movement pattern. Findlay, Dayton, Cincinnati, Louisville, Indianapolis, and multiple returns to Cleveland during 2010-2018. When these points were overlaid on a map, Collins noticed an anomaly. Most of the cities coincided with locations where Arthur Whitmore had been documented at various times. Two particularly noteworthy overlapping sites: an old motel in Dayton, where the owner once reported a strange, reclusive, middle-aged man renting a room in the 1990s, and a vacant lot near Louisville, where police had noted an old green van parked overnight, but could not identify the owner. Although there was no direct forensic evidence, Nathan's movement pattern, or more precisely, the places he was documented after escaping or being released, matched Whitmore's movements multiple times throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. This led investigators to believe that Nathan's period of control was not limited to the Findlay cabin, but extended over years across various temporary locations, as if deliberately relocated to evade detection. As records continued to be compared, a new detail emerged in at least 3 shelter intake records from Indianapolis, Cincinnati, and Cleveland. Beyond the description "male with cognitive impairment," there were notes that he was accompanied by a middle-aged woman, black hair, Ohio accent, who identified herself as his caregiver. These 3 descriptions, spanning years, shared suspicious commonalities. The woman always spoke for him, signed with a false surname, and left immediately when staff requested verification documents. In the 1999 Cincinnati record, shelter staff further described her as always maintaining excessively close physical proximity and obstructing any efforts to allow him independent contact with medical personnel. BCI compiled a catalog of all descriptions related to this woman and raised a major question: was she a co-conspirator assisting Whitmore in controlling Nathan, or did she directly take over when Whitmore was no longer capable of movement? Even more striking was that all three instances of Nathan appearing in records with the woman coincided precisely with periods when Whitmore's own records went silent, as if she assumed control of the victim during Whitmore's temporary absences. Collins hypothesized that this could represent a long-term captivity structure, not a lone individual's actions. Another finding reinforced this suspicion. In a 2003 Louisville Charity Church record, where Nathan appeared for a meal, staff noted he was accompanied by a woman claiming to be his aunt, who displayed vigilance when staff recorded identifying features. Though no photo existed, the record clearly described her build, hair color, and habit of covering half her face with a scarf, matching descriptions from the other two locations. When investigators re-interviewed former staff at that center, one female employee recalled that the woman had sharp eyes, a demeanor like a teacher or someone with authority over him, and that Nathan was very afraid when she held his hand. This was the first piece indicating that over the 31-year journey, the victim was not controlled by a single individual, but possibly by at least two adults. BCI continued tracing Whitmore's movements through temporary residency reports, room rental documents, scattered utility bills, and old Ohio driver records. Almost every time Nathan appeared in a city as a nameless homeless person, Whitmore was also documented nearby just months before or after. While this coincidence did not prove a direct link, the frequency was sufficient to conclude that Nathan was moved along this man's path or left behind at stops when the perpetrator's control weakened. The record-tracing phase also revealed a complete gap in Nathan's presence in any system from 1990 to 1993. 3 blank years coinciding with the period Whitmore rented the Findlay cabin and various scattered lodgings in southern Ohio. During that time, no medical or shelter records of Nathan existed, suggesting he may have been continuously confined at a secluded location before being moved elsewhere. A key detail emerged when Collins compared all shelter intake forms in the accompanied by section. 2 of the 3 facilities used the same initials, LM, to describe the woman. Though it was unclear whether this was a false name or an abbreviation of some title, this match became a new focal point in the investigation. Tracking the mysterious woman became a new priority, as she could be a crucial link connecting Nathan to the extended relocation phase after leaving the cabin. For Collins, this was the first time in months that Nathan's 31-year silence began to take shape. A chain of movements tied to Whitmore, interspersed with the appearance of an unnamed woman, cities along the central Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana corridor, and terrifying gaps proving periods of total isolation from society. Nathan could not recount his own life, but the administrative traces, scattered notes about a nameless man, were beginning to reveal a common pattern. The boy who disappeared in 1988 never vanished from the world. He existed in its shadows, always on society's margins, always under someone else's control, and for 31 years, no one realized it was Nathan Cooper. BCI decided to shift to layered memory collection techniques to avoid overwhelming Nathan, as medical records showed his long-term memories were fragmented and only surfaced when triggered by appropriate recall cues. In the initial sessions, the psychologist did not ask directly about Whitmore or specific locations, but focused on people who were near you, an indirect approach that allowed Nathan to select which memories surfaced. When asked about the woman who appears in your earliest distant memories, Nathan hesitated for a very long time before speaking haltingly. She didn't talk much, but her voice was like a teacher, short, clear, never laughed. This was the first sufficiently clear description of the mysterious woman, noted in multiple shelter records. Nathan continued disjointedly that she did not speak to him directly, but often gave orders in very short sentences. Stand there, don't look at the door, sit down. He described her voice as not high, not low, but sharp and final. When the specialist asked about the woman's habits, Nathan showed caution but continued. She had some kind of medicine smell, like hospital, but stronger. And she always wore a scarf, even indoors. This information was immediately noted because it matched the 1999 and 2003 records. The woman always covering half her face with a scarf. In another session, Nathan was shown illustrations of various walking surfaces, wood floor, tile, concrete, to evoke environmental sound memories. Upon hearing footsteps on wood, he reacted immediately. She walked, like heavy on one side, right leg, slight dragging sound. This could indicate someone with a knee joint issue or uneven gait, rare but highly valuable data if a female suspect needed identification later. Regarding living environment, Nathan described the small room he had mentioned more clearly when cued with cabin images. No light from large windows, just a slit of light too high above my head back then. Low ceiling, not a normal house. He also recalled damp wood smell and wet leaves smell, two elements consistent with a forest setting or an old cabin lacking proper moisture barriers. When shown multiple images of Midwest and Appalachia cabins, Nathan showed no reaction until seeing photos of small cabins in the western Pennsylvania forests, low ceilings, high windows near the roof, and dark wood characteristic of humid climate. He lightly touched the photo and said, like the place I stayed for a long time. Investigators noted this immediately, as the Findlay cabin in Ohio did not have roof-high windows, whereas Nathan's description matched cabin styles scattered in Pennsylvania, especially Clearfield and Elk counties. When asked about familiar sounds in memory, Nathan described water sound, but not a big river, like small water from high up or from a pipe. The specialist concluded it could be runoff from gutters or drain pipes in a sloped roof cabin, a common feature in Pennsylvania forests, but not typical of the low-roofed, simple drainage Findlay cabin. Another detail arose when Nathan was asked about light. Mornings brighter than evenings, but no lights in the small room. Only lights in the outer room, hers. This implied he had been locked in an annex without lighting or with bulbs removed. A common victim control method in prolonged captivity cases. Regarding the woman's habits, Nathan remembered she wrote a lot, always held a notebook, and read quietly to herself at night. He described the sound of pages turning and a ballpoint pen tapping on wood, indicating she may have kept a diary or records throughout his captivity. When experts probed deeper into food memories, Nathan said, "She gave food in plastic bowls, never left metal spoons, only plastic." This was a sign of control behavior to prevent the victim from having hard or sharp objects, common in improvised confinement settings. Another notable point, Nathan never described the woman beating or yelling. Instead, it was absolute coldness. He said, "She didn't hate me, didn't like me either, like I wasn't a person." This detachment often accompanies viewing the victim as an object to manage, a more dangerous trait than explosive violence. When overlaying all of Nathan's memories onto geographic data, Collins noticed significant coincidence. Many abandoned or low-rent cabins in Pennsylvania had layouts closely matching the description: small annex without large doors, high windows, damp wood smell, and drain systems producing small sounds. This opened the hypothesis that after the Findlay period, Nathan may have been moved out of Ohio to another cabin deep in Pennsylvania forests, where isolation conditions were ideal for long-term captivity. At the end of the session, Collins wrote in the report, "Nathan's memories are incomplete, but the fragments about the woman, sharp voice, face covering scarf, uneven gait, note-taking habit, along with clear spatial description, form a consistent structure sufficient to expand the search radius to the forest cabin regions of Pennsylvania." This was the first time, based solely on memory, that BCI had a new geographic investigative direction, a space the case had never touched in 31 years. Based on the unexpected matching chain of memories from Nathan and the specific descriptions of the living space, BCI, in coordination with the Pennsylvania State Police, narrowed down more than 20 cabins located in dense forest areas of Clearfield and Elk County, places with architecture and natural conditions exactly matching what Nathan remembered: high-placed windows, low ceiling, the smell of damp wood, the sound of a small stream flowing, and especially the level of isolation that Nathan repeatedly described as no sound of cars, only wind and water. After 3 weeks of cross-referencing maps, long-term cabin rental records, and lumber transaction documents from the late 1980s to early 1990s, the investigative team located a cabin that matched to Nathan's account almost perfectly, an old wooden structure deep in the forest near Benazet, rented multiple times between 1991 and 1995 under various names, including one closely resembling Arthur Whitmore's signature. The cabin had long been abandoned, its windows boarded up with thick planks, and its location so remote that it required nearly a mile of walking to reach from the nearest road. When investigators approached the cabin, they established a crime scene perimeter and conducted an examination following protocols for sites potentially used for long-term victim confinement. Outside the cabin, there were no signs of recent habitation, but the vegetation around the base of the walls was noticeably lower than normal, indicating that in the past, the cabin had been occupied long enough to create worn paths. Upon entering, signs of long-term habitation were far more evident than in the Findlay cabin. The main room was larger but crudely arranged, with old furniture still carrying the musty odor of a place sealed for many years. The most striking feature was the side room, exactly as Nathan had described. Small, low ceiling, no light bulb, only a narrow window slit high near the roof. The door to the side room was unusually thick, secured from the outside with 2 rough wooden bolts, indicating that at some point the room had not only been locked, but reinforced to prevent opening from the inside. The interior surface of the door and walls clearly showed numerous scratches, carvings, and small gouges, some similar in pattern to the marks Nathan described when he said he had once used a sharp object to scratch dates into the wood to keep track of time. On the cabin floor, beneath a thick layer of dust, the team found 4 broken fragments of colored chalk, blue, yellow, red, matching the type used by children and aligning with Nathan's memory of having chalk once but not being allowed to hold it for long. This made the cabin the strongest candidate for the site of long-term confinement during the period when Nathan completely vanished from all administrative records. In the kitchen area, investigators discovered a small wooden cabinet with a broken hinge. Inside, among a few old rusted canned goods, was a critical item, a handmade bound notebook with yellowed paper lying at the bottom and almost completely obscured by decayed items. This was the most valuable new evidence found since the case was reopened. The notebook had no owner's name on the first page, but the handwriting was sharp, neat, and divided into regular dated entries. The content was not an emotional diary, but resembled logs of monitoring, with incomplete dates. Some pages only marked Day 3, Day 12, Day 28. Many entries described behavior control procedures, such as, "Do not let him out of the side room unless necessary. Keep quiet during the day. No direct light exposure, and he is not allowed to look at me for more than 3 seconds." These notes matched Nathan's descriptions of prolonged absolute isolation, the woman's sharp commanding voice, and the fact that light from the outer room was the only source of illumination. Investigators also found several pages recording notes about cabin relocation, sleep-wake cycles, and notably one page mentioning away for 3 weeks, immediately leading Collins and the team to consider the possibility that the cabin was operated by the woman during periods when Whitmore was absent. Another detail increasing the notebook's legal value. One page had distinctly different handwriting, cruder, heavier strokes, presumed to be Whitmore's, as comparison with old signature records showed similarities in the final flourish of lines. That page read succinctly, "Don't let him near the door." If authenticated, this would be the first direct evidence that Whitmore had been present at the cabin and involved in controlling Nathan. In addition to the notebook, the team recovered an old piece of rope, 2 faded children's plastic bowls, and a broken plastic spoon, items consistent with Nathan's memory of never being given metal utensils. In a corner of the side room, under thick dust, was a small pale blue box lid, with traces of chalk remaining. Likely the container that once held chalk for Nathan during confinement. These items contained no usable DNA, due to the damp environment degrading all biological traces, but their value lay in behavioral evidence. They proved the cabin was not merely a temporary hideout, but a long-term confinement site with a clear pattern of control. Another finding that particularly drew the team's attention was wear marks on the floor near the exterior bolt door. Repeated linear scuffing consistent with constant back-and-forth pacing in an anxious or waiting posture. This led Collins to believe the cabin was where Nathan had spent the longest, continuous period during his disappearance. When all evidence was overlaid onto Nathan's recovered memories, the Pennsylvania cabin matched almost perfectly: high window placement, narrow slit light entry, faint sound of water from roof drainage, characteristic rotting wood smell, isolated side room, the woman's habit of keeping written logs, and especially the remnants of child-related items. After completing the examination, BCI concluded that this cabin was the longest confirmed confinement site identified in the Nathan Cooper case, the largest piece revealing how the victim was kept separated from the world for many years, and opening the next investigative direction to determine who operated the cabin, who the mysterious woman was, and how long Whitmore had been present there before vanishing completely from records. During a second full sweep of the cabin, an investigator discovered a small concealed void beneath the floorboards in the main room, covered by an old plank. When the plank was lifted, underneath was a small silver-colored tin box, rusted, about the size of two hands. Inside the box was the most significant evidence since the case began: a stack of old Polaroid photographs, more than 30 in total, tightly packed and wrapped in thin nylon bags. Many were blurry or faded from age, but most retained sufficient detail for identification. Upon viewing the first photo, investigators immediately recognized images of Nathan, not the 8-year-old boy from 1988 family photos, but Nathan at various stages throughout his confinement. The earliest photos showed him around 9 to 10 years old, thin, sunken-eyed, standing in the side room, with light entering through the high window slit exactly as Nathan described. Others showed him around age 12, sitting on the old wooden floor, hands on knees, expression blank. As the sequence progressed, the photos reflected forced maturation of the victim, Nathan at 15, hair longer from infrequent cutting. Nathan at 18, taller but still hunched. And most disturbingly, photos of Nathan in his 20s, with signs of chronic sleep deprivation, vacant eyes from prolonged isolation. Forensic experts immediately arranged the entire set chronologically based on physical development, hair length, clothing, and wear on background objects. The photo sequence became a visual timeline documenting each stage of 31 years of disappearance, rare evidence in long-term confinement cases. Beyond recording Nathan's aging, the photos revealed a consistently changing, yet thematically similar living environment. Dark room, wooden walls, small window, minimal furnishings. Several images clearly depicted the Pennsylvania cabin, identifiable by wood grain patterns, roof-adjacent window placement, and ceiling structure. Others, particularly those of Nathan around 12 to 14, had backgrounds not fully matching either the Findlay or Pennsylvania cabins: lighter wood paneling, wider door, and a metal door frame visible behind the victim, suggesting a third unidentified location. Investigators created a background analysis chart based on minute details such as nail patterns, light slit height, floorboard type, cabinet style, and even faint rug patterns in some shots. This helped confirm at least 3 distinct confinement sites throughout Nathan's ordeal. The analysis team also noted a critically important element: in many photos, reflections or shadows of the woman Nathan had described appeared. The single clearest shadow showed a figure standing at the edge of the frame, upper body wrapped in a scarf, lower body slightly shifted to the right leg, matching memories of her uneven gait and habit of always covering her face with a shawl. Another photo showed the woman's hand resting on a wall ledge, thin, long-fingered, wearing a simple ring, reinforcing Nathan's description. She wrote a lot, held a pen a lot. Some images captured the edge of a dark, heavy coat, typical of Pennsylvania's cold climate. Notably, in 2 photos of Nathan around 11, reflections in the window showed shadows of 2 adults, one tall, one shorter, very likely Whitmore and the mysterious woman together at a confinement site. This provided the first visual evidence that Nathan was not controlled by a single individual, but by a 2-person structure, aligning with shelter records, noting a quiet man and a sharp-voiced woman. Beyond human elements, photo backgrounds helped establish a site timeline. Early photos matched the old wooden door of the Findlay cabin. Mid-period photos largely aligned with the Pennsylvania cabin, roof-adjacent window, dark walls, characteristic forest light tone. Later photos showed Nathan in a space with metal furnishings, possibly a warehouse or makeshift room in an abandoned industrial facility. From a forensic standpoint, the Polaroids contained no DNA due to environmental degradation of biological material, but their value lay in constructing the complete stolen life timeline of Nathan, from age 8 to his 20s, and providing proof that at least one woman was directly involved in controlling him for many years. For BCI, this box of photos became the strongest evidence ever collected, bridging Nathan's fragmented memories, the Pennsylvania confinement cabin, and the deliberate presence of the mysterious woman. More importantly, it demonstrated that the confinement pattern was not impulsive but systematic, organized, and spanning many years across multiple locations, paving the way for pursuing accomplices in the next phase of the investigation. Based on the Polaroid box and Nathan's memory descriptions, BCI determined the need to track down the woman who appeared repeatedly throughout the 31-year control period. The only lead at this point was the initials, LM, recorded in 3 different shelter records, and the similarity between social worker descriptions and Nathan's recollections. Collins began by reviewing all residency data ever linked to Arthur Whitmore, including temporary addresses, motels, rented cabins, and demographic forms he filled out in the 1990s. The goal was to identify any female individual appearing in the same areas and time frames, especially one with a matching mobility pattern. When Whitmore's data was overlaid onto maps of Ohio, Pennsylvania, Kentucky residency, Collins noticed multiple overlaps with a name appearing sporadically in administrative records. Lorraine H., a woman born in 1955, who worked part-time at a small elementary school in Marion County in the late 1980s. The anomaly was that Lorraine disappeared from employment records after 1991 and changed addresses continuously thereafter, almost in lockstep with Whitmore's movements. In public residency systems, Lorraine appeared under at least 3 name variants, LH Mar, and sometimes simply Lore, matching the LM initials in Nathan's 1999 and 2003 shelter records. BCI immediately began reconstructing Lorraine's timeline by collecting data from demographic records, old driver's license registrations, part-time employment documents, community health records, and tax filings. The results revealed a clear pattern. In 1990 she lived near Findlay, coinciding with Whitmore's first cabin rental. In 1993 she appeared in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania rental records, just a few miles from the second cabin. In 1997, she had a temporary address near Dayton, matching the period when Nathan's records noted a woman identifying as a caregiver, and in 2003 she was listed among temporary shelter aid recipients in Louisville, the same time Nathan appeared at a charity church, all aligned with the Polaroid timeline and Nathan's movement phases. Investigator Collins realized that Lorraine did not appear coincidentally, but moved in near parallel with Whitmore over many years. Notably, in 1998 Lowell Clinic records, Lorraine was noted to have a right side limp due to a knee issue, matching Nathan's description of heavy footsteps on one side and the woman's right-leaning shadow in the Polaroids. This was the most critical match, elevating Lorraine to potential co-perpetrator status. Tracing further back, the team discovered that Lorraine had been internally disciplined at the elementary school in 1987 for inappropriate student discipline, though the infraction was not severe enough for police referral, only noted internally. This indicated a prior history of controlling behavior toward children before vanishing from education records. Even more suspicious, from 1991 onward, Lorraine left almost no continuous trace in administrative systems, no traffic accidents, no regular medical registrations, no fixed employment. This pattern of disappearance mirrored the semi-anonymous lifestyle Whitmore maintained for years. To dig deeper, BCI searched Pennsylvania cabin rental records under names similar to Lorraine's. In one of two long-term cabin rental facilities in Elk County, a 1994 registration page bore the signature L. Harlan, angular, forceful strokes, matching approximately 70% with the handwriting in the notebook recovered from the second cabin. A handwriting expert concluded there was a high likelihood the signature belonged to the same writer as the cabin notes. This positioned Lorraine as the individual most directly linked to the long-term confinement phase. Continuing searches beyond 2004, the approximate date of the final Polaroid showing Nathan around 24, 25. BCI found that all traces of Lorraine vanished completely from Ohio and Pennsylvania systems. Instead, scattered health records in West Virginia showed the name L. Harlan, but with no permanent address. Her complete disappearance from administrative maps after 2004 raised major questions for BCI. Had Lorraine died, changed identity, or continued living off-grid to avoid detection? A small clue emerged when checking old driver's license databases. In 2005, a similarly named individual applied for license renewal in a mountainous Pennsylvania county, but failed to complete the process due to lack of identity verification documents. Though insufficient to confirm it was Lorraine, it indicated she remained near the second cabin area, at least into the mid-2000s. Collins recognized the dangerous nature of the case. If Lorraine had participated in Nathan's long-term confinement and might still be alive, she could be central to understanding the full scope of events. Accordingly, BCI officially opened an investigative file named Lorraine H., adding her to the active wanted list. The report concluded, only one individual appears consistently across every phase of Nathan's control after leaving Toledo, the woman identified as LM, matching multiple characteristics with Lorraine H. She is the sole surviving potential co-perpetrator who may hold direct knowledge of the 31-year prolonged confinement process. Thus, for the first time in the investigation, the perpetrator model expanded from a lone individual to a two-person structure, Whitmore and Lorraine, with Lorraine identified as the last remaining link in the real world and the key target of BCI's next pursuit phase. BCI, after determining Lorraine H.'s role in Nathan's 31-year captivity, began expanding the investigation to the possibility of additional victims. This stemmed from two key factors. First, the travel pattern of Whitmore and Lorraine spanned multiple states and years in a repeating cycle. Second, the notebook found in the Pennsylvania cabin referenced a cycle, cabin moves, and several lines hinting at preparing the room before bringing in a new person, leading investigators to suspect Nathan may not have been the only victim. The expanded investigation began with a review of unsolved missing persons cases involving minors in the Midwest during the period Nathan was held. The BCI Analysis Unit compiled a list of more than 40 unresolved disappearances from 1985, 2005, then filtered them by three criteria. 1. The victim vanished without leaving physical traces. 2. Initial statements mentioned a dark-colored vehicle or van. 3. The disappearance location was near cities overlapping with Whitmore's movements: Findlay, Dayton, Louisville, Indianapolis, and the Pittsburgh corridor. From this, two cases stood out due to significant similarities to Nathan's pattern: the 1992 disappearance of a 10-year-old boy in Battle Creek, Michigan, and the 1998 disappearance of a 12-year-old girl in Fort Wayne, Indiana. In the Battle Creek case, the sole witness reported seeing a dark green van moving slowly near the playground, and reports also noted a dark-haired woman with an uneven gait appearing in the area several days before the boy vanished. At the time, no clear evidence existed, so the case went cold. However, The description of the woman matched Lorraine's appearance in residency records and Nathan's recollections to a notable degree. The Fort Wayne case had another significant feature around the time the girl disappeared. Local police received reports of a strange couple in an old van. A quiet man and a controlling woman who handled all interactions, and the victim was last seen near a wooded area adjacent to the highway. These descriptions aligned with a dual perpetrator pattern in which one person carried out the direct abduction, while the other maintained long-term control over the victim. When Collins cross-referenced travel records, she found key overlaps. Whitmore was in southern Michigan in 1992. Based on a vehicle repair invoice, Lorraine appeared in short-term apartment rental records in Indiana during the summer of 1998. While this did not prove guilt, it strengthened the possibility that the two suspects had been traveling the Midwest arc at the exact times of the disappearances. BCI created a behavioral motif analysis table from the three cases: Nathan, Battle Creek, and Fort Wayne. Common elements included all victims were minors who vanished quickly within 10 minutes in blind spots. No physical evidence was left at any scene. At least one witness in each case noted a woman with an uneven gait or sharp voice. The presumed environment was a secluded, isolated location, and in all three cases, police at the time initially underestimated the danger level, missing early opportunities to intercept suspicious vehicles. A particularly prominent motif was interstate movement. The victim disappeared in State A, but showed scattered signs of appearance in State B or C years later. This is a common trait of mobile criminal couples who are harder to detect because they do not remain fixed in one location. The BCI analysis team reinforced the pattern with information from the Polaroid photos. Many images did not match the Findlay or Pennsylvania cabins, proving the victim had been moved to multiple other sites, fully consistent with rotating victims, to avoid detection. In the Michigan and Indiana missing persons files, initial investigative reports also noted the possibility that the victim had left the state within the first 48 hours, but the theory was not pursued due to lack of interstate movement evidence. BCI reopened these reports and discovered that in the Indiana case, an old green van was captured on traffic camera near a forest exit within 90 minutes of the disappearance. When the image was enlarged, though very blurry, the woman in the passenger seat showed a posture leaning toward her right leg, a detail sufficient to include in the analysis. Recognizing the significant level of similarity, BCI formally contacted the Michigan State Police and Indiana State Police to establish an informal multi-state investigative task force to comprehensively compare files across the three states. Although the existence of a broader network has not been confirmed, the task force reached a preliminary conclusion: there are sufficient indicators of a pattern of abduction, prolonged captivity, interstate movement, and coordination between two adult individuals. The Nathan Cooper case may not be the only one. The report submitted to BCI leadership recommended elevating the case to serial abduction pair suspicion, a rare but documented form of crime in several high-profile cases from the 1970s, 1990s. Although no concrete evidence yet links Lorraine and Whitmore to the other two disappearances, the degree of behavioral match led BCI to consider for the first time that Nathan's case was not an isolated tragedy, but potentially part of a larger criminal pattern, with structure, movement cycles, and clearly divided roles between perpetrators. The report concluded, the expanded investigation phase shows the case extends beyond the Toledo area, strongly suggesting the likely existence of multiple victims, and confirms the need to locate Lorraine as the sole living lid who could unlock the entire 31-year chain of crimes. After completing the federal expanded investigation phase and solidifying the 3-decade-long criminal pattern, BCI shifted to establishing the legal status of the case based on all gathered evidence. The first focus was Arthur Whitmore, the primary suspect, who vanished from records after 2004 and was considered the most critical link in the initial abduction and multi-state movement of Nathan. When BCI coordinated with the Social Security Administration to check unclaimed death records, they discovered an unclaimed coroner's report in Fayette County, West Virginia, from 2012, the body of a man approximately 60 years old, no identification. Natural death from heart failure in a low-cost motel near an interstate road. West Virginia forensics had noted no signs of assault. No one came forward to identify him, and the case was classified as John Doe. But when BCI compared fingerprints, digitized after 2015, the John Doe prints matched those of Arthur Whitmore from an old Ohio traffic record in 1978. This was the first definitive match, confirming Whitmore had died in 2012, 7 years before Nathan was found. The death record was subsequently updated with his identity per protocol. With this information, BCI reached a critical conclusion: the primary perpetrator in Nathan Cooper's abduction and possibly related cases had died before the case was reopened. This meant Whitmore could never be prosecuted, tried, or questioned about what happened in the Findlay cabin, Pennsylvania cabin, or any other location during Nathan's captivity. Identifying Whitmore's death shifted the legal focus. Instead of pursuing the primary perpetrator, authorities had to trace liability among the living, particularly the woman identified as Lorraine H., the sole identified co-conspirator. With Whitmore no longer prosecutable, Lorraine became the remaining legal focal point. BCI built a tracking file on Lorraine, based on 4 groups of evidence, 1 coincidental appearances at multiple sites tied to Nathan's journey, 2 descriptions matching the victim's memories, including voice, face-covering scarf, uneven gait, note-taking habit, 3 Lorraine's likely handwriting match to the Pennsylvania cabin notebook, and 4 repeated appearances in short-term residency records where Nathan was listed as being under caregiver supervision. Combining these elements, BCI submitted the file to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Middle District of Pennsylvania to request a federal warrant for Lorraine H. on charges of federal kidnapping, prolonged unlawful detention, and involvement in the exploitation or abuse of a minor victim. The warrant was approved, officially designating Lorraine a federal fugitive. However, executing the warrant posed a major challenge, since Lorraine disappeared from records after 2004 with no financial, medical, or residency traces. It was highly likely she used false identities or lived off-grid in rural Appalachia, where many isolated communities remain completely outside modern administrative oversight. BCI reassessed the entire case under federal standards. The report concluded that Whitmore and Lorraine's behavioral pattern fit the rare mobile confinement couple profile previously documented in federal crime files, where 2 individuals divide roles. One handles abduction and victim transport, the other manages psychological control, long-term confinement maintenance, and prolonged concealment. Whitmore, with his transient lifestyle and inconsistent statements, fit the approach and transport role. Lorraine, with her background in education and highly disciplined personality, fit the supervision and internal victim control role. After confirming Whitmore's death, BCI's legal report stated clearly, the primary perpetrator cannot be prosecuted due to death prior to victim identification. However, criminal liability remains fully attributable, and the expanded investigation targeting the accomplice continues. This meant the entire criminal file retained its full legal weight, and the inability to prosecute Whitmore did not diminish the severity of the conduct. When this conclusion was communicated to the Cooper family, reactions were complex. Daniel fell into prolonged silence. After 3 decades of searching for answers, the primary perpetrator, who stole his son's childhood, had died before facing justice. Marlene broke down in tears of disappointment, feeling hollow that the truth's emergence brought no punishment after so many years of longing for it. Timothy, now an adult, said his strongest feeling was not anger, but emptiness, because the years Nathan was missing could never be recovered, whether the perpetrator was alive or dead. Legally, the case entered a new phase, focusing on verifying the scope of crimes, locating Lorraine, and assessing the possibility of other victims. The cold case unit affirmed that the warrant for Lorraine would remain active indefinitely until she is found or legally confirmed deceased. BCI's summary report closed the investigation phase with the statement, "The primary perpetrator is dead, but the case remains open." The years of Nathan's captivity still require explanation. Justice will only be complete when all participants in that 31-year ordeal are identified. For the first time in 3 decades, the case achieved a clear legal conclusion, but instead of closing, this discovery opened even more unfilled gaps, missing links, people yet to be found, and questions even Nathan could not answer. In that context, the post-reunion process became central, not only to support the victim's recovery, but also to extract leads from his fragmented memories. BCI, working with psychologists and victim support teams, began a comprehensive assessment of Nathan's mental state to build a long-term care plan. The initial report identified severe complex PTSD, a disorder common among those subjected to prolonged isolation, captivity, and behavioral control over many years. Symptoms appeared within the first week: flashbacks to the dark room, strong reactions to the sound of locks, fear of flashlights, persistent sleep disturbances, and dissociative states when confronted with family or personal past information. Nathan repeatedly woke in panic, bolting upright to scan the room and check if the door was bolted from outside, despite experts' efforts to create a maximally safe environment. This showed that 31 years of captivity had not only affected memory, but had deeply embedded itself into his survival reflexes. Nathan's integration faced many difficulties. Although reunited with family, rebuilding emotional connections proved more complex than anticipated. He was unaccustomed to kind treatment and often recoiled when someone tried to hug or touch his shoulder. When Daniel reached to hold his hand, Nathan hesitated for several seconds before allowing it, but his muscles remained rigid, a sign of someone who had not experienced positive touch in a very long time. Marlene tried talking to him daily, but Nathan often replied in short sentences, sometimes off-topic, or suddenly went silent when trigger words like door, cabins, or go outside appeared. Timothy, his younger brother, was more patient and used indirect approaches such as board games or short walks, which helped reduce Nathan's tension by avoiding direct conversation. Even these activities, however, had to occur in limited spaces because Nathan became anxious in crowded areas. Socially, Nathan faced even greater challenges. He did not know how to use a phone, did not understand modern transportation systems, and was unaccustomed to the fast pace of a world that had changed over more than 3 decades. On his first trip to a supermarket, he became panicked by the overwhelming lights, sounds, and movement he could not process. Specialists had to design gradual social rehabilitation, short outdoor exposures, practice of basic skills such as communication, currency recognition, use of household devices, and learning to distinguish safe from unsafe signals. Another key part of post-reunion was assessing self-sufficiency. Experts agreed Nathan could not live independently at present. His danger awareness, decision-making, and situational handling were equivalent to those of an inexperienced adolescent. BCI recommended a 24/7 care model at a specialized psychological support facility for at least 12-18 months, combining exposure therapy, layered memory therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy. The Cooper family agreed, though it forced them to face a difficult truth. Nathan had returned, but could not immediately step into family life as they had once hoped. Another challenge was the media. As soon as news of Nathan's discovery spread, local and national press relentlessly sought access to the family. BCI applied special victim information protection measures, ensuring Nathan had no direct media contact to avoid psychological harm. Experts warned that questions like, "How were you held?" or "Do you remember your captors?" could cause serious trauma and set back recovery. The Cooper family was guided on protecting privacy and handling media appropriately. The recovery journey also included rebuilding Nathan's sense of self-ownership. For 31 years, he lived under others' control. Every action, schedule, even sleep dictated. Thus, the first therapy goal was helping him understand he had the right to make small decisions, what to eat, what to wear, where to sit in the room. These simple exercises had a profound effect on restoring normalcy. Nathan's physical health was fully evaluated. He suffered chronic malnutrition, low bone density, mild muscle atrophy, and signs of old, poorly healed injuries to wrists and ankles. This indicated inadequate medical care during captivity. Consistent with the primitive confinement conditions in the Pennsylvania cabin, doctors developed a nutritional recovery plan and physical therapy regimen to improve motor function. Mentally, Nathan frequently experienced time disorientation, struggling to distinguish days of the week, and difficulty grasping concepts like the 1990s or the 2000s. Specialists used visual timeline therapy sessions to help him recognize the gap between memory and present. The Cooper family, though deeply pained, patiently accompanied him through every stage. They understood Nathan's healing could not be measured in months, but might take years. While reunion brought hope, harsh reality showed post-reunion was far from simple. Nathan had to relearn nearly every life skill, from communication to social adaptation, while carrying the invisible wounds of 31 years in captivity. Yet with expert support and family persistence, investigators believe Nathan's life can gradually stabilize, even if it will never resemble what it might have been. Although Nathan was found, and the primary perpetrator's identity was confirmed, the case still leaves behind many unanswered questions, becoming the coldest remaining remnant of the file. The biggest question revolves around Lorraine H. Is she still alive, or has she died? Her disappearance from all databases since 2004 has left the BCI unable to determine her status. If Lorraine is still alive, she is the only witness who could reveal the full truth about the 31-year journey of holding Nathan captive, about Whitmore's role, about other holding locations, and about whether there are any other victims. If she has died, the case loses its most critical source of information, and many questions will remain forever in the realm of speculation. The BCI doesn't even know whether Lorraine left before or after Nathan was released or abandoned, and whether this was intentional or caused by Whitmore's death collapsing the control model. The second question concerns the purpose of the Polaroid photographs. Why did Lorraine or Whitmore document Nathan's growth over more than 2 decades? The series of photos shows systematic tracking through every stage of age, not just when Nathan was young but extending into his 20s. Behavioral experts have offered various hypotheses, but none is strong enough. The photos may have served as documentation to monitor the victim's development for psychological control. They could be a form of diary to maintain power over the captive, or worse, the photos may have been used for some undetermined purpose related to preparing for relocation, changing holding sites, or assessing the risk of the victim escaping. Without answers from the perpetrator, the box of photos becomes evidence that is both clear and mysterious. It records everything but explains nothing about the reason. The third question: why was Nathan chosen? There is no evidence that Nathan knew Whitmore or Lorraine beforehand, no conflict, grudge, or typical kidnapping motive. The victim was simply an 8-year-old boy riding his bike home, falling precisely into the intersection of time and place when the perpetrator appeared. Yet the duration of the captivity suggests something far beyond an impulsive abduction. Criminal experts hypothesize that Nathan was selected not for personal reasons, but because of favorable conditions: young child, alone, area without surveillance, and fitting a behavioral pattern Whitmore had previously exhibited. But the more important question, why keep him for 3 decades, remains unanswered. If the initial purpose was sexual, the prolonged confinement and closed environment do not match the typical pattern. If it was psychological control, the length is irrational, and if there was some other purpose, it has never surfaced through any evidence. The fourth question concerns Nathan's memories. Exactly how many years of memory has he lost? His memories are so fragmented that nearly his entire adolescence and early adulthood are blank. There is no way to know what he experienced during those undocumented years. Experts believe Nathan may have gone through multiple phases of isolation, each eroding a portion of memory. Some memories may have been locked away by self-protection mechanisms, others possibly erased entirely due to lack of neural stimulation in the confinement environment. This makes Nathan's recounting of his life an unsolvable puzzle. No one, not even Nathan, knows precisely how he lived through nearly a third of a century. Another question that puzzles investigators: how did Nathan escape or get left behind? Why in 2019 did he appear alone in Cleveland, without Lorraine accompanying him, as in previous records? What caused the sudden break in the bond between perpetrator and victim? This ties directly to the largest gap. No evidence or testimony describes the final phase of the captivity. Those blanks keep the case in a half-open state, not enough to close the file, but also not enough to reach firm conclusions. The BCI states clearly in its report, although the victim has been identified and the primary perpetrator is deceased, many key questions remain unresolved, causing the case to retain its cold case nature. And indeed, many mysteries may never be solved if Lorraine is not found. Why 31 years? Why the Polaroid photos? Why Nathan survived? And why he was chosen in the first place? The Nathan Cooper case did not conclude with a trial or a confession, but with the victim's return after more than 3 decades missing, and a series of discoveries showcasing the power of modern forensic technology. DNA was the first key that reopened the door to time. From a jacket stored in evidence for many years, next-generation DNA analysis connected a 39-year-old homeless man to the 8-year-old boy who vanished in 1988. This is clear proof that proper evidence storage and advances in forensic science can completely alter the trajectory of a case, even when all hope seems lost. Nathan's story also deeply reflects the mistakes in the initial investigation. Mistakes that many local police departments across the United States have made. Misjudging the level of danger, treating the disappearance as runaway rather than abduction, failing to immediately activate protocols for endangered missing children, and delays in establishing a search radius wasted many of the most critical early hours. If today's Amber Alert protocols and federal standards had existed in 1988, Nathan's ordeal might not have lasted 31 years. The case serves as a powerful reminder to law enforcement about the importance of immediate risk assessment and the need for specialized training in perpetrator behavioral analysis, especially in child disappearances. For the Cooper family, Nathan's return, even with much of his memory irretrievable, remains a miracle after 3 decades of pain mixed with hope. They have become a voice representing families of long-term missing children, helping drive efforts to improve investigation procedures and support for returned victims. The Ohio community was also awakened by this story. Nathan's reunion was not just good news, but a wake-up call that disappearances can continue silently for decades, and that investigative persistence combined with scientific support is indispensable for justice. The case has had a broad impact on how other states in the U.S. review cold cases, especially those with untested evidence, using modern DNA techniques. After Nathan's case was publicized, dozens of police departments proactively resubmitted old evidence for analysis, leading to the reopening of some long-forgotten files. Legally, Nathan's case highlights the system's responsibility in tracking homeless individuals, improving victim identification through federal databases, and strengthening interstate coordination when suspects have wide travel histories. One of the most important legacies of the case is the changed perception of survivors of long-term captivity, that rescuing the victim is only the beginning, and helping them reintegrate into society requires a comprehensive specialized system. Ultimately, the Nathan Cooper file, though many questions remain open, stands as proof of the power of persistence, scientific progress, and the meaning of hope. It reminds us that even in cases that seem hopeless, a small trace, a forgotten piece of evidence, or a random match in a DNA database can change the entire story. And above all, it affirms that every victim, no matter how much time has passed, deserves to be found, to be seen, and to have their stolen life returned. The story of Nathan Cooper is not just a personal tragedy, but also reflects many social issues the United States still faces today: missing children misjudged in terms of danger level, communities not fully trained to recognize suspicious signs, and lack of data interoperability between states, causing many victims to disappear in the system for decades. Nathan's case shows that a single initial mistake, like Toledo PD in 1988, classifying the incident as temporary runaway, can lead to consequences spanning decades. This underscores the importance of law enforcement today strictly following proactive protocols, especially for children under 12. Any delay can trade away an entire life. The detail of the red jacket evidence overlooked for over 20 years is a lesson that no evidence is ever worthless when technology keeps advancing. Thanks to modern DNA, an old piece of fabric can provide answers that previous decades could not. For the public, the recurring appearance of the woman Lorraine H. in various communities, without ever being reported, highlights the importance of paying attention to suspicious behavior, especially when an adult is with a child who appears fearful or unusually silent. And the fact that Nathan, even though alive, struggles with complex PTSD reminds us that being found does not mean being healed. Communities, families, and social support systems need patience, understanding, and knowledge of mental health to accompany survivors. From those details, the greatest lesson is this: children's safety can never be taken lightly. Data and evidence must be carefully preserved, and communities must always maintain a vigilant role, because the smallest observation today could save a life tomorrow. Thank you for following the haunting yet hopeful journey of the Nathan Cooper case. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel to continue joining us in cases solved through science and perseverance. See you in the next video, where every small clue can unlock a much larger truth.